Said you had a minute, but such an obedient group here. I think we'll get started. So, noting the hour and the presence of a quorum, I'll call the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee to order. Members of the public who wish to watch this meeting online may do so on ActonTV's YouTube channel, found at the top of this agenda. This meeting is being recorded and will also be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. I'd like to express a deep thanks to the ActonTV team for coming in and spending the day with us. I'd also like to welcome everybody to our Budget Saturday workshop. Thank you to our school leadership team for joining us today, and welcome to the representatives from Acton and Boxborough Select Boards and Finance Committees. And then additionally, I'd like to wish everyone celebrating a happy year of the Wood Dragon. Special thanks to Julie LaLumiere and the AB Food Services team for helping to supply us with a light breakfast and lunch today. Everyone's welcome to help themselves to the snacks and beverages that we have over there. As usual, we have a packed agenda, but fortunately we have 7 hours to go through it, so let's get going. We are going to run this workshop a little differently than our usual business meetings. There'll be presentations followed by questions and answers and a discussion period. We'll roughly allot about 10 minutes for the committee for the discussions and the Q&A, and then we'll put 5 minutes up for the boards and the guests to ask questions. I would ask that we keep the questions and discussions to the topic that was presented. We will have time at the end of the meeting for open questions and to discuss and deliberate the overall budget. And I want to make sure that we get plenty of time to get to that part of the meeting. Finally, please do not mistake me cutting someone off or not calling on you as a sign of disrespect. I'm going to do my best to make sure that every voice is heard, and I hope that everyone will be respectful of the time that they consume today when it's their turn. Finally, one last comment about consideration. I think it's important for everybody to consider several truths as we work through this process. It is true that it takes considerable resources to educate 5,000 plus students with above state average outcomes and with below state average expenditures per student. It's also true that there's a great deal of disparity between our highest performers and our lowest performers, and we need to do better to serve all students. And finally, it is true that our communities are some of the highest tax communities in the Commonwealth, and we must be considerate of our ability to fund all that our community expects from us. So as we continue through this process, I'd like everyone to consider all of those things and that they can all be true at the same time, and it's our challenge and responsibility to balance them all. With that, I'll hand it over to Peter, and we'll start with our budget overview.
All right, thank you, Adam. Good morning, everyone. I would also just like to wish everyone who celebrates a happy Lunar New Year. I also just want to take an opportunity and welcome all of the members of the finance committees and select boards today, as well as citizen and guests who have taken time out along with our leadership team and our educators. This is a significant investment in time. It also shows the care and concern that you have for the education of children in the community, as well as the balance of resources. So thank you for being with us. We are here in our overall schedule. This is our Budget Saturday all-day-long workshop. We're going to have an opportunity to do a deep dive into the A and B budgets later and get some feedback from school committee and citizens. But we're also going to talk about special education in depth, talk about instructional leadership and administration across the district, as well as some of the potential structural changes that we have, and some open time for questions and answers on various aspects of the school budget, including different line items. We're going to be moving over the next several weeks between the preliminary budget, which is still what you're seeing today, to next Thursday, which will become a recommended budget to school committee. And then that will eventually go through a public budget hearing, and the final school committee budget vote is scheduled for March 21st. Obviously, some key dates for you. I already went through a few of these, but we are planning backwards from the two town meetings on May 6th and May 13th. And we also want to recognize that, this is a very unique year in that because Acton has reached its levy capacity and both the town and schools budgets are constrained by that at a level that's not providing the services that either of the two communities have come to expect. The town of Acton is moving towards an override ballot vote that would take place on April 30th, 2024, and then the budget would still need to move forward to both communities for approval at the annual town meetings. want to just talk first before we get into the numbers, because I understand that budgets are about numbers, but I just want to talk about what schools do. And I want to think about the types of educational experiences that we want for students. We're obviously going to talk about how we balance that with community resources. But for a minute, I just want to think about what do we want for our kids coming out of school, and how do we best provide that with the resources we have. One of the things I think our communities have prided themselves on is a broad sense of education and understanding that different students have different needs. And, you know, whether those needs, and sorry, Mike, I just saw you in the lawn chair, which I really appreciate. That is awesome. I've never seen that at a Budget Saturday before. I just have to make note of that is appreciated. We'll play some soccer in the middle here in a minute. Sorry, I had to go there for a moment. But you know, really, it's about the broad sense of what we do to educate students, and it's more than just the test scores that come out of schools. It's about their overall well-being and a sense of groundedness for our students. It's about the experience that they have in our schools that lead them into the whole variety of paths that they're going to choose later in life. And I think that's a really important thing to start off with, and just recognize that school is more about just the test scores and the fundamentals. You've seen this slide before. It's nothing new, but I just want to pause for a moment and recognize that the demographics of our student population and our families are changing rapidly. We're now at a place where 1 in 4 of our families' primary language in their home is not English. That's a really significant milestone to be hitting, and that means that at any given time, you know, we have over about 410 students. Actually, I think it might, as of yesterday, gone to 413. I'm getting the thumbs up from our multilingual coordinator. 430 students who receive English language services. About half of those students actually come into our schools not speaking English. So they're testing at WIDA levels 1 and 2, which is the absolute foundational level. And our educators are working with those students to teach English alongside learning all of the content area and standards that all of their typically developing peers have. So that's a real shift in enrollment. We also have seen a significant increase in the income status of our families. We know that we have wealth diversity in the community, and that the schools have seen a significant increase in the percentage of our students who are qualifying as low income, and that's driven a lot of thought. And so when we talk about, you know, the resource center at some point today, and you hear about why we chose to do a resource center, the resource center really lives at the intersection of those first two things that I'm talking about. It's about welcoming our families in a way that they can understand, in a language that they speak, and providing those services and making them feel like welcome members of the community. And it's also about providing resources to families who need them. So, you know, when we think about why do we do different initiatives, and schools have lots of initiatives that go on, it's really fundamentally comes down to who are the students that we're serving and how are we going to serve them with the resources that we have in our community. As Adam said, you know, there are lots of truths to this day, and, you know, one of those truths is that we get exceptionally strong performance and outcomes for our students in a variety of areas, and we're doing it with less than average funding across the state. That doesn't discount that we also tax at some of the highest rates in the state of our citizens, but the fundamental question is, that money is not, the tax money that we're taxing at such a high level of our citizens does not equate to above average spending on the school system. We've really tried to make 4 strategic investments in the coming budget, and I'm going to go over these quickly now, but we're happy to answer questions about them in more depth. One of those is a K through 12 social emotional learning and bullying prevention curriculum. We're required to do by law a bully prevention task force that we convened last year to really look at our bullying policy. And one of the things that they identified is we did not have, as required by law, an evidence-based anti-bullying curriculum. in our schools. We also have seen that play out in some of our data around our students and the types of incidents that we've seen, particularly following the pandemic, and the way, students are interacting and the social skills that they demonstrate. And this is something that, working with our principals, working with our mental health leadership team, and quite honestly, working with our educators who say that they need more resources around social emotional needs of students, we think that this is an important strategic investment. K through 6 literacy consumables, if you read the Boston Globe, you can see the reading wars are alive and well. The reading wars are, hopefully, further and further in our rearview mirror here at Acton Boxborough. We've made a significant investment through Dr. Bookus and all of our curriculum staff in revamping our literacy program, in really following a structured literacy model, which is everything that you hear about that's good in literacy right now follows that structured literacy model. We've received significant grant money over the last couple of years to implement different elements of that program, and we know that there are going to be consumable costs that have to get added into the district budget. A couple of years ago, we actually took, when we implemented our math program, we actually took purchasing out of the individual schools and did that at a district level because it's actually more cost-effective and more efficient to purchase in one place. We're taking the same process with these literacy consumables where we purchase them on a district-wide basis because it ends up saving costs and time for everyone at the building level. Professional learning to support multilingual students. I already talked about the change in the number of multilingual students coming in and the specific needs that they have, but we think it's incredibly important to support all of our general education staff in learning the skills that they need, as well as make sure we provide memberships for our English language educators to be able to participate in specific professional learning opportunities that are going to support what they do. And then the Acton Boxborough Resource Center, and I talked a little bit about that already. We were very fortunate as we advocated and received a legislative earmark last year that allowed us to not only do all the capital renovations to that space and kind of the welcome area of the administration building that you see, but also the first year of operational costs of that were able to be funded through that grant. We are looking to bring about 2/3 of that cost into the district budget next year. We also, because we have a migrant shelter in the community, will have the opportunity to offset about $20,000 of the resource center into the migrant shelter grant as well, because that center is doing a lot of work to support our newest families that we have in our district. Wanted to just pause and, I actually did this because I wanted to check my own thinking. As I've been out in the community and hearing a lot of discussion of the school budget, and it's certainly not a broad universal feeling, but I think there are, certainly members of our community who get concerned that school budgets become bloated over time or are wasteful in spending. And so, as I've been going through this budget process, it's funny because I actually start to question myself a little bit about how we've spent money and the choices that we've made. And so I wanted to go back a little bit through the history of our spending and the impact that it's had on the two communities. And, I can tell you that overall, we've been remarkably consistent in developing a budget that comes in at just about 3%. And this is the last 7 years. I will say I've been here since, the FY19 year. I started in 2018, which is FY 2019, and you can see what our budget history has been since then. We work hard to recognize the resources of the community. We work hard to stay within that, and that's something I think, quite honestly, we take pride in. I will make a note that in FY 21, that is the year that the debt from the new school came into play on our budget, and so I wanted to show, the overall increase in the budget, because I know that's what taxpayers see on their tax bill, and also recognize that the actual operating budget was well under 3% for that year. Over that 7-year period, as I said, our budget increase with building a $114 million school was 3.58% on average, right? And that's with opening a $114 million school. We've been able to come at 3.58%. Our operating budget increase alone over that period, 3.03%. That is a remarkably consistent number, and it ties and tracks extraordinarily well to the resources of the community. You can see the two assessments and the impact of those over the last 7 years in terms of what's that has done. I will note that the early part of the assessment largely included a regional agreement agreement of a cost shift from Boxborough to Acton that drove the early part of the assessment more in favor of, more in favor of Boxborough, but it drove the costs toward Acton in the early part of the regional agreement, which is why, when you go back to this slide, we had multiple years of, either, sub 1% assessments or negative assessment increases in Boxborough in the early part of regionalization. In the later part of that time period, it's all about enrollment now. And we are seeing a decrease in the number of students in the Acton community and an increase in the number of students in the Boxborough community, and that's really driving those 2 percentage differences. I decided to go on the Bureau of Labor Statistics site and just take a look at what inflation has done. We are just coming down now out of the highest period of inflation since the late 70s and early 1980s. And, for those of you who were around then, including me, you remember what was happening in the world around that time. It was a period of remarkable turbulence. You know what was happening to people's wallets. You saw gas prices going. This is when we had all those lines at the pumps, gas shortages, everything else. Fortunately, we never hit that level of inflation, but we did just go through the highest period since then. So everyone going to the grocery store and trying to purchase eggs or milk saw it and how it hit their pocketbook. Well, on a grand scale, the district purchases a lot of eggs and a lot of milk. We also have to pay for health insurance. We also have to pay for special education costs and all those other things. As I look back on what, my time in the district was, which is roughly this chart, we, when I started, went through a period of relative prosperity. And you can see, where there's blue showing early in this graph over the red line. That is the period of time when we were able to start building our special education programs. We were able to, continue to reduce our class sizes from some of the largest in the state to some that are very appropriate at this point. And so, we went through that time of relative prosperity where we were able to do some strategic things, and then we had, obviously, the pandemic. And coming out of that, you can see in the red now, that's all the stuff that we now don't do. That is where we're seeing historic increases in special education, in transportation costs. Healthcare obviously plays into that. Every budget driver that we've talked about that's been a problem for us all fits into the red. That is the impact of what inflation has done and the rising costs to schools. It doesn't mean, though, that when inflation comes down, those costs are going to go away. We all know how inflation works. It actually permanently increases the base costs to a school district, and we're living with that now, where the base costs of doing business have increased. And, the challenge that we have as a school district and a community is we either pay for the increases in those base costs or we have to reduce the services that we provide as a school district. And that is the conundrum that we're all facing right now. And I understand the resources of the community play into that, and I'm not discounting that at all. But the stark reality is if we don't fund the cost increases, we pay for them in other ways. I will also note that during that period of time where you see the red showing, that is where we've used more reserves to fund the budget. It's where we had pandemic relief keeping us afloat. It's where we also reduced 40 positions in the school district to try and meet those costs. And I know that some people will question whether we reduced the 40 positions. Those 40 positions don't now exist. We might have other positions such as special education or English language services. But the bottom line is those 40 things that we had before now don't exist in our school district. This was that period of time leading up until now. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. And this is what it looks like in the best case scenario that the school district is presenting for next year. This is the A budget overlaid with the last 2 years. A few reflections as I wrap up the introduction here. Our communities are taxed at a very high rate. I understand that. Our average operating increase for the last 7 years has been 3.03%. I think overall, that's a recognition that the school district understands the resources of the community. We have certainly taken initiatives that cost money. We have added counselors, we've added special educators, we've added English language teachers. We also dealt with incredible mental health needs in our school district. We've dealt with much more intense needs of our students with disabilities, and we're dealing with a much larger English language population that actually comes in speaking less and less English every year. The budget increases that we've had, though, have not kept up with the rising costs of inflation, and the gap between those costs and the budget has been closed with a combination of the reductions, the reserves, federal relief, and grants that we've been able to seek out and obtain. I will note the use of our reserves to offset operating costs is problematic. And without those reserves, we would have reduced far more than 40 staff over the last 2 years at a time when we feel like our students need them the most. Our increases in the fixed costs in FY25 are incredibly challenging for us. These are going to permanently increase the base of our budget, and if we don't fund those increases, we're going to permanently reduce the services we provide to students. We have 2 budgets that we've developed. The first is our A budget, which is an 8.56% increase. The second is our B budget, which comes in at a 3% assessment to the town of Acton. That is a 1.73% increase. I won't draw your attention back to the slide around inflation, but I will, obviously, by just mentioning it. But this is really, you know, we are working on this budget. We understand the challenge that it presents to taxpayers. We understand the challenge that it presents to the community. We are not spending wildly as a school district. That's not what we've done over the last 7 years. I know that we should question in tough times every line item of a budget, and we are certainly happy to respond to those questions. But when you look and take a step back, we have made investments in the kids that we serve, and we've provided programs and opportunities to make sure that we take care of those students and we continue to take care of the community that we're serving. And by and large, we've done it in an extraordinarily fiscally responsible manner. So that, I hope, sets some of the budget context for today, and I'll turn it over to Sherry, who'll get deep into the finances.
Good morning, everyone. You will see in a few slides that Peter happened to use one of the slides I used, so I'm sorry if it's going to be a little bit repetitive. But we're going to start with the revenues. I know we haven't had our second quarter yet, but I guess you could consider a little bit of these revenues a second quarter update. So in the first column, it shows what we have budgeted for revenue for FY24, and that equals out to our budget of the $106 million. Second column shows exactly what has come in to date, which is the $51 million. And the third column, this is where we're projected. So our charter school reimbursement aid is projected to come in higher than we've budgeted. Our Medicaid reimbursement is going to come in lower. And thankfully, our earnings on our investments, the interest rates are still high. So we're projecting a positive $398,000. So we're projecting to have $419,000 extra at the end of the year. Sorry. The second slide here is what the governor came out with their budget at the end of January. Oh, I went to, for the Chapter 70 funding, we have actually budgeted $1,200 more than the governor has proposed. That is all based on enrollment, so that number will probably hold true. So when we do in our adjusted budget, I'll make sure I adjust for that $1,200. The next column, oh, I'm sorry. I don't like being on camera. The charter school reimbursement, we're actually projected to get $12,909 more than we've budgeted. And as far as the regional transportation, this is actually happening. I've checked with other districts around us. Our initial budget is $186 less than is budgeted, but historically, over the last 6 years, the final budget is on average $203,000 more than the governor's original budget, so I think we're still okay. As for the estimated charges, those numbers will also fluctuate within the House, the Senate, and the final budgets, but I'm confident that we've budgeted the proper amount for those expenditures. This page shows our reserves and what our projected E&D is going to be at the end of the year. So the Department of Revenue certified our E&D fund balance as of July 1st, 2023 for the $2,772,972. The next section recaps where we believe we're going to land at the end of the year with the overall remaining balance of the $419,000. If you add those two numbers together, you take away the $1,375,000 that we used to offset the FY24 budget, and the projected additional $450,000 we might need to handle the health insurance for this year, then we're projected to have a certified balance as of July 1st, 2024 for $1,367,148. Obviously, we're hoping that that number is higher, but we really won't know until the end of the year what we're going to have left. This next slide, I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about circuit breaker, and it's very telling about our circuit breaker reserves. In a combination of future slides, Jen Truslow, Director of Special Education, is going to go over how circuit breaker reimbursement works. But in this slide, the green line represents the FY24 reimbursement coming in from the state during the fiscal year. The red line represents the funding that we needed to offset the FY24 budget. We originally budgeted to offset this year's tuition with $3.55 million. However, due to unforeseen move-ins and student needs, we had to allocate an additional $1.35 million to balance the costs. The purple line represents where our projected fund balance will be as of June 30th. This is an incredibly low number for the end of the fiscal year, and we have allocated $3 million to offset the district tuitions for next year. The financial rule with circuit breaker funding is that you can only carry over into the next fiscal year what you've taken in as reimbursement for that year. And the goal for all districts is to try to leave the entire balance at the bottom line and offset the next year's with that balance. I have not spoken to a single district yet who is going to be in the situation where they can carry over their own balance. Everyone is having trouble with tuitions, and they've been talking about it at all the meetings that we've been having. So, as we previously stated before, the OSD, which is the Operational Services Division, who sets the tuition prices under the Mass General Law for private special education programs, they raised their prices a historic 14% this year, and they've approved a 4.69% increase for next year. And to put that into perspective, I went back to 2011, and from 2011 to 2023, the average increase was only 1.83% during that time. You've seen this slide before. This is the preliminary A budget. In the top section, it shows the difference of increases between the salary and the non-salary accounts. As you can see in the middle section, the 3.25 or the 2.26 million is from salary increases and contractual obligations. The 7.93% or 3.22 million is from fringe benefits such as health insurance, Middlesex retirement, Medicare, and OPEB. 5.22 or 2.12 million is from the out-of-district tuitions and the transportations. And finally, that 1.78, the 725,000, is from contracted services, including the utilities, and the remaining is just the variable costs of supplies. The bottom section shows our offsets, and the increase or decrease in the budget, increase in the offsets is some of it is the energy rebate that we were hoping to get for the boardwalk building. We need to have a full year of data in completion before we can receive that, so we didn't budget for it for next year either because we're not sure exactly when everything is going to be completed. The $395,000 is from the community ed and the food service departments to offset the utility costs. And the $3 million I previously talked about, that's going to be the circuit breaker offset for the out-of-district tuitions. This slide is a slide you haven't seen before, and we only put it together to show what level services would have been had we not taken away the $2+ million. It just shows if we continue to have the level services And the notable changes that you see here are in salaries, fringe, and contracted services. They represent the numbers if we didn't cut the 25.1 FTEs that Peter just discussed. The difference in contracted services is for the Assabet program for $130,000, capital improvements for $37,000, and the technology lines for $114,000. But you will see that the transportation and the tuition did not change at all. So if I just kind of toggle back and forth, you can see that 3.25 was salaries in the projected A budget, and it would have been 5.59, and it would have been an overall 10.51% increase if we continued with our level services. This is the slide that Peter's already talked about, so I'm really not going to, if you want to just take a little snapshot of it, it's going to look the same that his did. And then finally, I just wanted to throw out some enrollment trends. The overall enrollment numbers have gone down since 2018 and FY 2019, but most notably, the Acton enrollment has been reduced significantly as Boxborough's enrollment continues to rise, and this is where the greatest shift in all the assessments come. And those 3 last years, that's a NASDAQ projected based on a historical view. And that's where my slides end and Andrew's start.
All right, good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Andrew Shen. I'm the Deputy Superintendent, and want to briefly provide a few slides that offer some sort of overarching themes around staffing in terms of over the past 10 years, roughly over the course of regionalization. I'm not going to dive real deep into things. Obviously, I think later on in the presentation when we start having conversations about proposed position reductions or shifts, we can get into that. But these are just more thematic. Before we get into some of the staffing trends around certified positions, we did want to mention, especially for those who might take a deeper dive into the budget binder and some other documents, this doesn't really apply to the slides that are coming up. We did make a change in FTE calculations for hourly positions. In the past, we used different bases to identify FTEs. And so, for example, at the bottom, if you have, our classroom assistants were typically, those positions were 19-hour positions. And so in previous years, a 19-hour position was viewed as a 1.0 FTE because that's what it was in that position. We realized that that doesn't allow you to compare apples to apples in a lot of ways. So what we decided to do for FY24 is for hourly positions is base everything on a base 40-hour work week. So you could have that comparison. So in FY24 this year, a 19-hour classroom position, even if that is sort of a full classroom position, we viewed it as a 0.475 FTE. So for those who might take a deeper dive into sort of how many paraprofessionals did you have this year versus last year, you'll notice a much larger variance and is the reality because of how we changed the calculation. So again, this slide doesn't really apply to the next few slides, but certainly for those who are going to take a deeper dive into hourly positions and the FTEs, we wanted to make that clear. This is offering you sort of a 10-year, roughly 10-year history in terms of certified positions as calculated by DESE based on the information that we report to them annually. I think what's most important about this slide is it offers you trends. I would caution you in terms of if you want to get into actual change over time from one year to the next, there are a few things that are important to note. When we report to DESE, first of all, we report based on a specific period in time in October. And if there are positions that are unfilled, if there are positions that are filled by long-term subs, those actually aren't incorporated into DESE's calculations. And so I think what is still reliable is the overall trend. And that's where we wanted to share and acknowledge that, for example, our special ed staffing as a percentage of our total FTE. You can see that from 2014 to last year, certainly consistent increase. Certainly EL teachers, a substantial increase. So I think the theme is really what we want to acknowledge in terms of not only the change in staffing, but also the change in student needs being reflected by the staffing priorities that we've made. Similarly, you have some information about administrators, paraprofessionals, other licensed. Other licensed is things like psychologists, counselors, media literacy, librarians, et cetera, et cetera. And so those are just some themes and trends over time. Obviously, the 2021 year with COVID, we had a remote school. We had an entirely additional school, so that obviously changed things both in terms of overall staffing as well as administrators. Just to reinforce some of the trends that Peter discussed, special ed staffing, as much as enrollment has continued to decrease as a theme, the students who we serve and how we want to provide the education that we think that our community wants to provide really demands of us a shift in the types of positions that we incorporate. So certainly you'll hear from Jen Truslow, our expansion of specialized programs, the Compass program, Pathways. Pathways started at the elementary level, it is now at the junior high, and so as that program continues to move through the grade levels, we obviously need to account for staffing. Mental health supports and resources, that's obviously been an area of great commitment and attention by our district for a variety of reasons, both to be responsive as well as proactive. Adjustment counselors and psychologists are positions that have continued to be investments on our part as a district. And then again, for students who also need related services through BCBAs, speech and language, OTPT, you know, the range and the profiles of our students really demand for us to be responsive in terms of those related services as well. And so that the slide or the chart at the bottom is just a repeat of the slide that I provided earlier. English language, yep, as of February 8th, it was 412 students who receive English language services. In our FY25A budget for next year, we do also propose an addition of 1.6 FTE to again be responsive to the growing population of students who receive these services. That also then was factored into the other reductions that we made, knowing that in order to increase those positions, we had to account for reducing other areas in order to fund that. So again, you can see the trend from 2014-15, it was 3.7 FTEs for EL teachers. All the way to 10.8. This year we are at 14 English language teachers, and quite frankly, 14 is still not enough. And so that continues to be an area of growth. Over the past few years, MTSS, similar to other districts, has been a great area of focus for us, especially at the elementary level to begin with. And so for those who have been wondering about, again, the decrease in enrollment and yet the increase in other positions that may not have existed 10 years ago, 15 years ago, MTSS has certainly been an area of investment on our part. The building-based coaches and the roles that they play at the building level to support staff at all levels in terms of thinking about providing services to students, thinking about data-driven decision-making and accommodations, and also services to students. Math specialists, we now have a math specialist in every elementary school. That has been, in addition, an important one in terms of intervention where and when teachers and administrators feel that students warrant additional services. Reading specialists have been with us for a bit longer, but again, that they contribute, and as we've thought about prioritizing them, we continue to view them as part of an important aspect of our response to creating a robust MTSS model. A few things just in terms of kind of the nuts and bolts of personnel planning. When we think about personnel budgeting, and so this is just to offer people an understanding again when they look into the weeds of the personnel planning. When we budget for either new positions or vacant positions that we anticipate for next year, whether it's because of retirees or departures, we used to put a placeholder, because we haven't hired the person yet, at a master's step 3. This past year, a master's step 3 is around $63,000. Again, you budget for that without knowing who your candidates are and who you're hoping express an interest in Acton Boxborough and who we think would be important to bring to our district. And so historically, and certainly this year, the average salary for newly hired employees was a bit higher, about $10,000 per teacher hire, so it was closer to an M6. So when we thought about next year and trying to budget in a way that was reflective of what we think would be trends that continue in terms of us being competitive, in terms of us wanting to continue to be competitive with other districts in finding the teachers who we want to have in front of our kids. We did change our budget placeholder to an M6. So that did create a slight increase in terms of how we budget and plan for open positions. This slide is just to offer a bit of an overview of our negotiations with the ABA, our certified staff, in terms of COLA. I think certainly, as people are aware, we are in the people business, and so, you know, a good 2/3 of our budget is personnel, is salary, and some of the fixed costs that we have to do with our contractual obligations. Our most recent contract with the ABEA was for 3 years of a COLA for 7.25. For those wondering how that looks in comparison to the rest of the Commonwealth, I offer you some districts that have recently settled their contracts and also districts that often are viewed as comparisons. Obviously, people are familiar with the recent negotiations and the protracted negotiations in Newton. And so you can see that compared to other districts, you know, 9%, 9.5%, 10.5%, we are quite a bit lower. Not only was COLA an area that is something to pay attention to in terms of cost of contract, but certainly one of the areas that has been an area of great focus in recent negotiations has been paid parental leave, which is quite expensive, and that is something, again, along with the COLAs, other areas have agreed to as well. So that just offers you some comparison as we try to continue to be competitive in terms of the teachers who we put in front of our students. So again, that was just to provide some trends and themes. You know, as we get later on in the day, we will obviously talk a little bit more at a granular level about positions that people might have questions about. But for now, I think we'll go to, actually, I think we're doing some questions and answers.
Yep.
And then we'll shift to special education.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes that we will open up for questions and a little bit of discussion, if any. We'll start first with the committee. Anybody on the committee have questions? School committee. Lakshmi.
So I have quite a few questions, but the first one is, I really would like to see a historical trend. Where did we, as a district, start to spend more? Where did we see the changes? And that's where I think we would see what, as a district, we decided to spend on and make sense to people, the community, and then decide, is this the direction we need to go? So I am looking at numbers which say we need 9.5, and we are taking a 2 million cut with budget A. Budget B would be the entire increase. And I watched Boxborough FinCom Select Board meeting. I did not attend, but I watched. And one of the questions really struck me, which didn't occur to me till then. Why are we talking about decimating a school system with a budget of over 100 million when we can't get just 4 or 5 million more? I really would like to understand why. Not the language part of it. I don't want comprehensive statements. I really would like to see the numbers. That's where I really would like to understand, where are we spending? We know the enrollment has been going down. Where are we spending extra? Why are we spending so much more compared to 10 years ago? Where is the money going?
So I want to make sure
I'm not looking at 4 or 5 years. I really would like to go back to.
This is 7.
Farther back.
So there's going to be a period of time that the farther back you go, I mean, we might go a few more years, but then there's also full regionalization. You're going to see a substantial jump when the district absorbed all of the Boxborough costs as well, is my understanding. So, I mean, we can certainly go back, but all of that's online. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what specifically you're hoping for.
So So the enrollment has been going down, inflation adjusted. If our numbers are going further than that, and all the extra, the costs with the personnel costs and all that, why are we struggling to say we are dropping positions? And at the same time, there's one more question on the dropping positions. We've added positions along the way, so that doesn't get reflected. I think that's not an accurate picture. We have added a lot of positions. I think we should also put in the picture where we have been adding positions. I think that's more accurate.
You mean going back every year for the last 10
Yeah,
and showing exactly what?
Yeah, not just present how many we dropped, how many we have added along the way, right? I think that makes a fairer statement to say, why did we add? And the other question is, I know Andrew's presentation about the staffing said we increased staffing. I don't have problem with the staffing, but I have problem with the data presented for the second one, the second table. Why doesn't it go all the way back? Like the other
Andrew, do you
one?
want to speak to that?
Why doesn't what go, you mean the one with the administrator one?
Yeah, yep.
Those, the DESI website only has those for those 3 years. So what I wanted to do is make sure that we were using the DESI reported data. And so the second column only goes for the past 3 years.
Yeah, but that doesn't give us a real clear picture, right? So if we have to make an informed decision, why we are spending where we are spending, and if we are on the right path, and if we need to get that extra money or not, I think we need all the numbers on the table. I think that's where one of the questions is. The other one is the health insurance trust. How did we not, how frequently do we assess those? And why did we not assess, look at them, evaluate every quarter or whatever? And how did just it come down so suddenly on our head with few $1 million in whole?
Let's take the health insurance trust question later at the end when we discuss
Okay,
that.
yeah, that's fine, you can defer that. I think I think I can see a clearer picture with the direct student investments, but I am seeing a lack of data on other parts, and I think I really would like to see that part. Thanks.
Other questions from the school committee? Tori, and then Ginny.
Not actually a question, but a comment. Could we go to Andrew's last slide, please? It's the one right before we transition to special ed. So this is a really helpful roll-up to me. As I'm looking at some of these comparison communities, Andover is facing override in the next year, according to the comments we saw in the press based on the strikes that they had. We know that Newton just had one that failed. Shrewsbury had one a couple of years back. It's just interesting to look at this and think through where some of these other districts are at. And what I took away from this is I appreciate the negotiations that the union and the school committee before me had that at least put us in a place where we can look at things just past contract. Because this could actually be worse.
I was struck by, the different ways that you listed of how the district has filled the gaps between rising costs and the assessments for our communities. But one of the things that you didn't say was that our educators have filled those gaps. While there have been staff reductions and increased needs, there are people who are standing in that gap every single day. And I just want you to talk, because we have heard from educators via email, and I know from talking to educators in the community over the last few years how incredibly, and also my work here with you all, how incredibly impactful it is living through a historic pandemic, the resulting challenges and increased needs that have occurred in our student population, just as it was, and then the changes in demographics and all of that. And I don't want it to be lost on anybody in the community or in this conversation today, or while we grapple with the serious situation that we find ourselves in, that, our educators are showing up every day and dealing with the student population in front of them and their increased needs. And so I think that we need to hold that in mind when we talk about further reductions, that we have been consistently over the last several years asking our educators to do more with less while their own families are under stress and have experienced all the different things that everyone in the community has. So I just want to hear a little bit, if whoever, up here can talk about that, and that, I know is definitely a very serious issue with regard to our special education population and what was lost for those kids during remote schooling, and also our youngest learners who, could not access curriculum online just due to their age, and what impacts that has had on our staff, and, what you can say about that in terms of, the needs and the responses.
I'm going to jump in and say that's an excellent question for our educator panel at noon when we've got the educators up here. I think we can hear directly from them. I'm seeing some thumbs up from our panel moderators. They probably have those questions already prepped, but let's keep that for that. And we're going to talk about special education right after this, so I think maybe Jen and team can bring that up at that point, if that's okay, Ginny. One more round around the committee. I have one quick question. Can we go to slide 33? Andrew, on this slide that was talking about MTSS staffing, we see 18 staffing priorities, or 18 staff members focused towards that. Can you clarify, is that where we're at today? Is that where we're going to be after an A budget or something like that? Or was that the original desire to staff it up? Maybe Deb could speak to it.
The original vision for supporting a supportive structure for MTSS has district-wide level discipline-specific coordinators to coordinate the work at the district level, has coaches in the building to support the use, as Andrew was saying, the data, and also instructional coaching and the implementation of those core programs, math specialists and reading specialists to then provide direct service and intervention for students. And also we have 6 reading assistants to also support the reading implementation and early literacy, which is very important.
And are all of those positions in place now? And what would it look like
Yes.
next year with the cuts that are proposed in the current A budget?
And I'll also just add there's also a digital literacy coach to also help with assistive technology and the kinds of technology that supports the different tiers, intervention and also core programming. In the A budget, which we'll talk about in a little bit later on, in the A budget we would be losing 2 of the remaining discipline-specific coordinators that we have, and we would go to a more generalized curriculum coordinator, and we would not have the digital literacy coach. In the B budget, and the reading assistants, thank you, Andrew. In the B budget, we would then also not have the coaches and the math specialists.
Thanks. Lakshmi.
Okay, this will be my last question. So MTSS is data-based, and so it's supposed to be an effective program, which is very good. We are moving along with proven strategies and methods, right? And then we adopted technology in the classrooms, which are supposed to help with intervention as well. Then we have classroom size as well in the same equation, which comes from the old-fashioned thinking, small classroom size helps. So all those add costs. So when new things come in, when do we reevaluate and say, hey, the old one probably need to be relooked at? Do we really need those small class sizes if we need these two? Where do we start kind of, should I say, living within the means? I mean, for a community member, I think that's a big concern, right? They live with fixed budgets, most of them. And how do you justify to them? There's no upper limit to how much you want to spend, right? So where do we stop? I definitely could have sent my kids to more help to do a little better in certain subjects, right, beyond school. But my ability to pay stopped me. So I think there are constraints everybody has to deal with, and I think do we take those into the equation is what I'm asking here. I like MTSS, I like technology, but then we still hang on to the old ideas of small classroom size.
Yeah, no, Lakshmi, I appreciate that. I think, we certainly take seriously the notion of living within the means. And, one of the reasons I wanted to go back over the last 7 years was our district consistently comes in at or around a 3% budget, understanding the means of the community. And so, when you start to go back into the budget history, and, I apologize because we didn't have all of that for today, but you're going to see that even though we've also made additions, oftentimes when we make those additions, we're making trade-offs with other things. So, for example, in the current year's budget proposal, we know we're going to have to add some English language educators in order to support the growing needs of the population. When we created the reduction list, we put those in first, but that increases the amount of reductions that we have to make overall as a district in order to get to whatever numbers that we end up at. Another good example was, we really thought about the MTSS model, and granted, it's still young for us, but coming out of the pandemic, we knew going into the pandemic, it was one of the greatest gaps in our district, that we didn't have a tiered system of support. And when you don't have a tiered system of support, it makes special education the only game in town, which we know then can substantially add to costs. So MTSS is a good idea overall. We didn't have it. We also didn't necessarily have the funding. So we did two things. We used some of the pandemic federal relief money to fund those, which we then had a step-down plan, and we've been following that plan so that it was gradually incorporated in the budget. But a large part of that was also funded because we made other hard staffing decisions. In particular, that year, we reduced classroom assistant hours to offset a large chunk of that cost as well. And so, it's always about trade-offs, because overall, if you're continuing to add staff and you're continuing to also come in at a 3% budget increase, it doesn't signal that you believe there's this unlimited cap on spending. And I know that's an easy thing to think because it's frustrating that we're all in this position. But the major drivers of the challenge that we have aren't the staffing costs this year. They aren't, we're not adding a bunch of staff this year that's driving the cost. We're reducing 25 to try and get to a budget that we can present. It's the health insurance costs, it's the special education costs, and those are fixed costs that we can't avoid. We're working really hard on health insurance, and we're going to talk about that at length because I actually think there's some hope on the horizon for that. However, it's still presenting a real budget challenge for us. And, I just want to respectfully push back on the notion that we have been adding with no understanding of the cap of the community resources, because that's just not the overall evidence of this that I see.
Thanks for that response. I'm not blaming anything on this year. They're really structural, and I completely understand. But what struck me is that we keep adding new things, and we never seem to revisit the existing ones if they're still relevant. And I think that's where, I think as a school committee, I'm not talking about administration, as a school committee, we need to review.
I would challenge that, Lakshmi. Having been on the committee for a while, there are clearly trade-offs that we make each year when we're adding things. And we've made very strong decisions around adding in areas like MTSS and recognizing that to do that and to add the staff that support that, there have to be cuts elsewhere. You can recall maybe 3 years ago, a pretty significant backlash from the community when we started to pull assistants out of classrooms, because what we did is looked at the information, the data, and the committee made the difficult decision to say, these assistants are really well loved in the classroom, but the results that we can get with fewer certified teachers and a structure like MTSS actually provides better. So those compromises, not even compromises, those analyses of what are we going to take away to add these things, those have been made along the way. They're just not as often presented because sometimes they're not a well-liked decision that the committee makes.
Yeah, I think what I'm getting to is building a system that's fundamentally has a strong foundation. Our schools are strong. Our school's financial picture is strong. And I think that doesn't mean that we just balance the budget every year. We don't ask for more money. But I think we should look at it at a wholesome perspective. Is that really necessary? Are we spending in the right place? And I think if that was there, and we wouldn't, even if with the structural issues we had, I don't think we would have been such a big, kind of a problematic place, I would say. Yeah.
All right, we're going to move back a set of tables, and we'll just sort of work our way this way. So we'll start over here, Christy.
Hi, I'm sorry, just a bit of housekeeping. The Finance Committee, the Acton Finance Committee, we're not used to having another one around, meeting was called to order at 8:32 this morning.
I just want to make a point to support Peter's slide on what's actually shown right now. He had a slide on inflation, and I just want to make a point that the inflation slide is actually understated. This is a slide that's showing data points in time, and if you take the Prop 2.5 over the same time frame, and you take those inflation points, and you look at inflation in a cumulative basis, what happens is in 2021, you have a difference where inflation impacts the budget by about 2%. 2022, it's a difference about 5%. 2023, it's 8%. 8% times 100 million is $8 million. So there's a lot of data points here. There's a lot of things, but the inflation impact as a static point compared to what the budget can increase on a normal basis is an $8 million impact. So just want to make that point.
Okay, go ahead.
I know you guys strategically made decisions within the last few years to increase your ability to keep kids in district, right? So if I'm looking at staff increases like psychologists, speech to language, OT, PT, those sort of services, this may be hard to quantify, but I'd love to see if you can come up with some sort of report that shows what savings have been recognized by making those changes, especially now with the increases for sending kids out of district. And you don't necessarily need to do that here now, but I'd love to see that. Thank you.
You might be pleasantly surprised, because that's one of our slides in special education. I'll just give you, a really rough order of magnitude, because it's not a slide. I was actually researching some other comparable districts, and I looked at Belmont yesterday. And I actually have started looking at other district budget presentations and understanding where they're spending money. Roughly the same size district between Belmont and Acton-Boxborough. Similar community constraints around spending and everything else. Belmont's all-in special education costs are roughly 22 million, somewhere in the same range as ours. Our out-of-district costs are about $7.5 million a year. Belmont's out-of-district costs for next year, $13 million. They do not have the same programming that we do in district, and there's a direct tie between how you provide district programming inside your district and the out-of-district costs that you should anticipate. We actually have done, on a return on investment analysis, on our 3 largest programs that we have, which are, span K-8 or K-12 in some cases, and we're going to talk about that in our special education presentation.
Hey, I have a question maybe for Andrew, is if you could go back to the COLA slide of the surrounding communities. I don't think this was part of the packet. It would be good just to have this for reference. At least I didn't see it in the material that was sent out. And so I appreciate that you have, the FY 24, 25, and 26 COLA adjustments. Can you speak to what the average cost per FTE increases from FY 24 to 25? And that COLA is a part of that, but there's other items that factor into that.
Andrew, I think we can.
Yeah, do you want to?
My gut is we're probably talking about 5-ish%, 5.1%, somewhere in that range. I use this number, the level service budget slide, because it's carrying the 5.59. That, however, is also inclusive of the additional special education staff that we added this year that are budgeted for next year. So that's not really an individual person that's increasing, it's the total budget, as well as the increase in the substitute budget. and a reduction in, I'm forgetting the name of it, our favorite line item. The vacancy factor. Reduction in that vacancy factor that we're accounting for as well. So there's probably $1 million to $1.2 million, I'm going to guess, Sherry? Yes. In this budget that's driving the 5.6% increase for level services. So I reasonably think if you back that out, it's probably somewhere in the 5% range. Once you add in steps, lanes, everything else.
Right, okay, so that's really helpful. And if I just take a step back broadly and say, you know, the average FTE cost is around 5% per year, and we're talking about the FY25 budget and all the challenges. And then if you factor in that, you know, FY26 numbers, the COLAs are at least in line, which is probably reasonable to say steps and lanes, et cetera, are in line with that. It'd be probably reasonable to think that FY26 cost per FTE would be up about 5% or somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, that's what we're projecting right now.
I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah, and just, you know, to state the elephant in the room, and I know this is an ongoing challenge, but I mean, there's just going to be this persistent constraint on the Prop 2.5 and the levy limit, et cetera, et cetera. So we're talking about FY25, very clear, and you've got a lot of great information here, but this challenge is going to be persistent. And I'm mainly stating this for just all the organizations here, and I think everybody kind of knows this, but it's really helpful just to have a point on it. Around 5% is a number like that to anchor on just going forward.
Yeah, cost of contracts are one of those things that will, you know, always in 100% of school districts be a budget driver. And, you know, it's something that you have to manage over time. You know, and when you have periods of high inflation, you know, you understand that, you know, salaries tend to also creep up because the staff that you employ are dealing with the same constraints that everyone else is. So, you know, I think, you know, we try to be really reasonable with how we manage those. You know, and the same goes into, you know, when you go to Andrew's slide, you know, the cost of living increases, those districts as well are all seeing the steps and lane costs in addition to what's showing up here. So it's not like, you know, our steps and lanes are calculated only for Acton-Boxborough. They exist in other districts as well.
No, very fair point. But the other interesting takeaway, I think, from looking at this slide is that many of these agreements were negotiated pre-inflation. And so, you know, going into FY24, if presumably many of these were negotiated in FY23, which would have been 2022, we weren't talking about 3, 5, 6% plus inflation. We were still talking about 2%-ish. So that was just one of my points. And the second, I did want to just second the overall sort of FTE count for the district as having sort of a broader number, just to have context around the FY23, 24 cuts, and then the proposed 25 cuts. It is helpful just because, and you have some of the numbers in there, but that we just a little bit more context around that would be helpful.
Center table, any questions there?
Tony Newton from Boxborough FinCom. So firstly, in full disclosure, I should say that I have a daughter who's a teacher in the school system. Secondly, just to let people know that obviously for Boxborough, this is a bigger issue in a way because the 8% increase in Acton translates with the math to a 15.59% issue in Boxborough. So that is a live discussion right now, and just to let you know that, you know, there are voices on both sides of the table, I would say, in Boxborough FinCom and Select Board about which way that goes. But you know, and I'm personally on the side of you know, we need to accept, you know, sort of accept this and obviously evaluate the budget very closely. But it becomes a more painful issue in Boxborough. And I think the issue about the future increases is very relevant to us because we're looking, you know, thinking ahead 2 to 3 years, and where do we look in terms of potential override in Boxborough? I think we're getting closer to that, personally. There's obviously resistance to that. We need to be able to sort of plan that out. We don't want to be sort of blindsided by this in, you know, next year or the year after that. We want to know what's coming down the road to us and plan appropriately. So the more we can understand about the sort of trends. Is this year a sort of a one-off extraordinary event that we need to absorb and move on, or is this going to be accelerating over time, is an important question for us, I would say.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, if you can go to slide 12, that would be great. It's the one with the, yeah, this, I mean, just as a comment, I mean, I think this is a great slide, and this is indicative of a school system that is not spending any crazy amounts of money or, you know, spending carelessly. I think this is fantastic. But the one comment I have is really the allocation. So if you can go to slide 18, I think is what it is. It's the primary slide that we all show up there. So yeah, that's it. So in Budget A, the percent year increase is about 8.5%. And you know, in light of inflation, that makes sense, right? But Budget B is, or Plan B, I should say, is 1.73%. That's an odd number for growth, right? So, and I know there's the magic 3% there, right? So basically, Budget B was calculated with 3% and then back calculated to 1.73%, right?
Yeah.
I understand that. But from Boxborough's perspective, that's an odd choice. It's like almost a false option for us. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, in fairness to the people of Boxborough?
I would totally recognize that. I think the reason that we ended up at a B budget number we did is it's the maximum budget increase that we could do without either community falling into an override status. Because if an override fails, that is the default. And so that's the only reason that we went there. It is the max cap on a budget increase that we could come up with without one of the two communities passing an override.
And I understand that.
Yeah.
But I mean, this kind of maybe goes out to the people of Acton, but I mean, is there another flavor beyond the base non-override option that, you know, we should consider, right? Because it's either a draconian cuts or a very large increase for the people of Boxborough, and that's our problem.
Thanks, John. I think we'll have some more discussion on that. I think one of the comments that I'll make as someone who's been in the process before for the past few years and also a resident of Boxborough, I would say that we need to do better, and by we, I mean both the school committee from Boxborough and the town of Boxborough leadership in having these discussions sooner. So clearly there's a process in Acton that drives a lot of this. There's no reason why we couldn't have a similar discussion and a process inside the town of Boxborough. Yeah, for the past several years, we've been driven by the limits of one of the two towns' abilities to fund. And what we're looking at now, particularly with the A budget, is, I'm not going to say no limits, but clearly a more open process or open sort of budget option. And so we need the town of Boxborough to come to us, and we need it to happen sooner than it has this year. So that's clearly a lesson learned for next year, so that we can have those discussions prior to this time where we're really sort of presenting not the finalized budget, but you know, a majority of the work that's done. So I think that it's a really valid point. It's clearly time for the pendulum to swing more towards the center in terms of both communities having early input on where the budget's going to land for the future year.
Yeah, again, it presents us an unfair option. It's an awkward option that I don't think is real to the people of Boxborough, quite frankly. Okay?
I will talk with you about that more offline,
right.
for sure.
Actually, I just have a quick question for Andrew. So Andrew, on the FTEs that you put up, you made a caveat statement at the beginning, or a statement at the beginning where don't compare over trending, over time. Does that apply to the numbers that you were demonstrating?
Say that one more time.
Remember when you first came up and you
Yeah.
presented, you said that we changed the FTE calculation methodology.
Oh, right.
Over, you know, I think after 23, it's consistent.
For hourly employees.
Okay, so.
So the slides that actually I then showed afterwards don't really apply to that. It's if you go into the budget binder and start looking at things like paraprofessionals, special ed assistants.
So that change was just for the hourlies, and you were showing.
Correct. Only for the hourlies, we started using a base 40 hour.
And what you were showing were not hourly, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Wes, before you go, can you make sure the microphone's on? And sorry, Jason, I'm going to go to a representative from the Boxborough Select Board first. Go ahead. Switch up.
There we go.
Yeah, thanks.
I know how to work switches. That's why I got out of high school. So Wes Folks from the Select Board of Boxborough. So I'll say that there's no formula for hard things. I keep hearing, well, we used to do this. I couldn't come here today and leave my 10-year-old at home like my parents would have been able to do with me. Things have changed. Prop 2.5 was enacted in 1980 by an anti-tax group, and so they just picked 2.5% as an arbitrary amount that they thought would pass. And so I'll tell you that since Prop 2.5 passed, 22 out of the 33 years have had inflation higher than 2.5%. I will also tell you that probably most of the people in this room would be really pissed if their raises were capped at 2.5%. So I don't blame the teachers for asking for more. I also pay into a Ponzi scheme, the government runs it, it's called Social Security. Those raises have also been way more than 2.5%. I will probably see little to none of the money that I've put back into it. And the people that are voting or on constrained budgets are the ones reaping the benefit of that. I also benefited from this high school from a program that is no longer existent, and now I have a very good job because of it. So I don't really see why we keep looking back. We need to deal with how it is now, and moving forward, how are we going to keep the school funded so that way our kids can come back and live in town, because, by the way, it's really effing expensive.
Thank you. Acton Table 2.
Thank you. I have a number of points, as I'm sure you're all surprised to hear. With regard to inflation and salaries, yes, absolutely paying attention to the fact that inflation is going to run at, or salaries are going to run at a 5% increase for the foreseeable future is a big deal, especially being constrained with a 3%. We always say 2.5, but in reality with new growth, it comes in around 3.1. So I grant that. But I also ask you to remember that for years when inflation was near zero, the cost of education was still going up at 6.5% personnel year over year over year. So 22 out of 33, okay, that's fine. 22 out of 33 years since Prop 2.5 has passed, inflation is over 2.5. Means a third of the time it's below. So yes, don't just look at the last 2 years. Make sure you look at a 10-year set. Otherwise, you're not being accurate about the actual overarching long-term costs of running education. In last year's budget binder, and I realize, Andrew, you're going to say that I'm looking at non-40-hour FTEs, but in last year's budget binder, there was a projection of 813 full-time employees for the entire district. In this year's liner that just came out last week, it says that this year's number of employees is 826. It's my understanding that there have been some people that have been hired since the budget of last year was, the budget binder was published last year. I believe there was some special education people that were hired right at the end of the year. So, okay, your statement that you have removed 40 positions is absolutely accurate, but you've added at least 13 to 16 FTEs during this last year. Are you suggesting that those added FTEs have done nothing to help the general education of the entire district? I don't think it's accurate to say, just give us credit for the 40 that we've cut and not account for the other staff, specialists, and educators that have been added. And the question that I have is, can you help me understand how these added staff impact class sizes? So, put another way, in the last 10 years, we've lost 12% of our population. We've not lost a single staff member, FTE, if you look at the last 10 years. It's the same number. And how did that represent itself? Yes, 10 years ago, our class sizes were exceptionally large, larger than anybody was comfortable with. So now our class sizes are more reasonable, may not be exactly where we want, but they're more reasonable. My question is, with such a large population in special education, and we've added, clearly, a large headcount in specialists specifically for special education, how does that impact the class size? A lot of the special education students are either going to be in separate sections, such as the compass and the pathways and whatnot, or they're going to be pulled out for added education during different class segments. So I think it's not accurate to just say, we've reduced 40 positions, and anything that you cut now is going to thoroughly and completely, irrevocably change class size. So I want to understand better how that shakes out. And I find, you did, Mr. Superintendent, you did say that you understood that there are 40 positions are gone, other positions are filled. I respect that, but we are a people, this is a people business. So when you look at the reduction in student population and the 0, in fact, it's up by 3 FTEs in the last 10 years, I have a hard time understanding exactly how that shakes out and how this becomes a crisis level. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what I can tell you is the addition of special educators and English language educators does not in any significant manner, I mean statistically significant, increase or decrease overall class size. Special education is a service delivery model where there are services that get pushed into classrooms, where a provider comes into a classroom and educates students within a setting, and there are times when students might be pulled out for a portion of the day to work with a special educator. But regardless, that student is still in the general education setting for most of their day. There are some specialized programs where students might be in a substantially separate setting for a large chunk of the day. But overall, as a district, the number of students that don't get pushed into a general education setting at all is minimal.
But the responsibility of the main teacher in the classroom has been diminished by the presence of the special educator being in the classroom to help those number of students or those students being pulled out for that particular class. So the workload on that one particular, so what I'm pushing back on is the statement that I heard at one of the school committee meetings that the difference between 16 students in a classroom and 18 students in the classroom is chaos. And my suggestion is that may be true, but that doesn't mean we're necessarily going to suffer that particular failure at this time, because we are adding resources. We are absolutely adding resources.
Jason, can I just clarify what I think I heard you say is that if and when you add special educators or English language teachers or speech and language therapists, that somehow the actual sort of workload or capacity of the general ed classroom teacher is improved?
Yes.
Okay, so I think, and this will probably be a longer conversation, I probably see things fairly differently. You know, I would say, just to give you a small example, when you have an English language educator who's working with a student who has no foundational English, and they work with them for 45 minutes a day to just help them with language acquisition, that doesn't necessarily, I'm not sure how that translates sort of in your model, where when they are with the general ed teacher in 3rd grade for the other 4.5 hours a day, that somehow markedly changes the responsibility and the obligation of that teacher to help working with that student who has no English whatsoever, learning other content.
I am positing that resources are being spent and that the faculty-student ratio, the time spent, I grant that special education is a more expensive model, but I'm still having a very hard time wrapping my head around how a 10% decrease in student population can be completely overrun by an 8% increase in special education students.
I hear the question. I think that actually is probably one of the themes that might emerge from educators, talking about what they do and how their world is different than what was previous. I think it's always hard for administration to speak for educators because we recognize we're not the ones in the classroom, and I don't think we're going to be as articulate about talking about what educators actually see on a basis. So if you, I recognize what that question is. If we can hold that for the educator panel too, I think they may lend some additional color.
I do have 2 other quick questions. One I just want to put out there. I don't expect there to be an answer today because while I may have mentioned it to you once before, it was not done in a public session. How does the change in high school leveling help or hurt class size and the resultant number of teachers and staff, the requirements therein? I don't expect that answer today, but something that I would like some input on. And
just
then,
very briefly, I actually on a personal note, and I was a high school principal for, the better part of a decade, and a high school teacher, and a high school assistant principal, and a department leader, too. So I have, 20 years of working in a high school. I actually see course leveling as, quite honestly, in general, class size neutral, other than as teachers try to make the change in instructional practices between an old system in which students were homogeneously grouped to one in which students are more heterogeneously grouped. There's a learning curve for staff, and you want to have, class sizes that are reasonable and manageable for high school teachers. Quite honestly, as you play numbers out over a large high school schedule, and I've done a lot of scheduling in my day, when you have more levels, you actually get more variability in class size, and the fewer levels you have, you actually even out that class size over the levels. Good instruction requires reasonable class sizes, right? We need to maintain reasonable class sizes as a district, but the more levels you have, you're actually going to see a lot wider variability, which means you see, more classes on the low end and you see more classes on the high end as well. So I actually see it as pretty agnostic to funding.
Okay. And then lastly, my understanding is that the circuit breaker reimbursement limits have not changed. I understand that the amount of money that other districts and other schools can charge us has gone up, but that the circuit breaker reimbursement limit has not indeed changed. So if indeed it costs us more money in any given year, we're going to get up to, and I realize up to does a lot of work in that statement, but we get up to 75% of those costs back. So while circuit breaker right now might be in a very dire strait, and I'm not disputing your numbers, I absolutely agree with the facts. Is it not also the case that in a year or 2 years maximum, that we're going to receive a much larger reimbursement from the circuit breaker side, and therefore that will maybe not completely replenish the circuit breaker set, but it should not be taken as this is money that's lost and gone forever. It's going to get reimbursed in 2 years period of time. So making a permanent change in the increase in taxes and increase in budget for something that you're going to get back, substantially get back, 2/3 or 3/4 back within 2 years, is not the right approach for a long-term budgeting. Is that accurate?
That is partially accurate, yes. I'm just going to add a little bit of color to that because even though you're right in that we will receive more in circuit breaker reimbursement, it will never be fully proportional to the amount that we're expending because as costs go up in special education, the 25% share over the minimum threshold that the district owns is also going to get bigger and bigger. So we're going to own that share of the costs always as costs go up. And even if you receive more money in circuit breaker, your tuitions have already gone up the following year. So the amount that you need in circuit breaker is actually a larger share than what you ever had before. So I overall think it's pretty neutral to that. I mean, you are absolutely correct that we will receive more in circuit breaker reimbursement, and we're going to need more in circuit breaker reimbursement because our tuitions are now permanently higher than they had been. Anything you would add, Sherry?
I do believe that next year we will receive a larger amount, but special education needs change from year to year. So we might have kids going in, we might have kids coming from outside programs back in. So our number does fluctuate. And as Peter said, the baseline does change. So yes, we do know that I believe next year we'll be able to kind of try to build up that reserve again, but you really don't know what's going to happen the following year until you kind of go through the students and know what programs they're in.
So agreed. Like I said, I knew it wouldn't fully replenish it. I never said that it would. But at the same time, this is a shorter term issue because there was such a large step change in the costs in 1 year. Once that step change ceases to be such a large delta year over year, then over time it will become less of a short.
Tuition is making then it
two of the slides that were comparables. To are Concord Carlisle and Lincoln Sudbury. Talking with members of the real estate community, when people are looking at borough, what they also then consider meetings that I sat in on, the comment was made that regional school districts have a dynamic of their own. All the other comparables you had there were single community districts. So I think it would be useful to see some context there. So that was on the comparables. Second comment, and I only have two, is on your presentation of what would a level-funded budget look like. I'm delighted that that's there. This is the first time I've seen that data, because one of the things that I'm encountering, and I think even at the last school committee you heard, there was a student who got up and said, I asked students what they wanted level funding. Well, that's not even an option. That's not A, that's not B, that's not an option on the table. But there are a lot of people in the communities, both Acton and Boxborough, who haven't seen an override vote for a long time. I think in Acton, the last one was 19 years ago. And so when they hear the word override, they think back to the past. And the overrides then were always basically a battle between level funding and not level and cutting. So in the context, it would be, I'm glad you've added that data. It sort of reminds us of the option that is not on the table. We are not talking about level funding at all. We're talking about one set of cuts versus a second set of cuts. So that's good context.
Thank you. David.
Hi, very simple question, I think. On Andrew's slide that summarized the educational staffing, does the special ed category include the MTSS, like math specialists, literacy coaches, et cetera?
No, it doesn't. So math specialists would not be considered special educators, nor the reading specialists, nor the coaches.
So where do the MTSS educators fall?
It depends. So math specialists would, for example, fall under the general education staff. And yeah, all of them actually, if I'm thinking about the ones that were listed.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else on the Acton table? Alyssa, go ahead. Lakshmi, we're going to go to the public and then we're going to move on. So hold the question. We'll have some more time later, okay?
I'll be real quick. So Alyssa Nickel. Just full disclosure, I am an assistant at one of the elementary schools. I'm one of those part-time 18-hour folks. I just want to say thank you to the administration for reclaiming the narrative in your introduction of fiscal responsibility. I think it's really important that the community sees that the school district has not been wildly spending over the previous years. I also want to challenge a couple of comments that I heard early on from folks who have been speaking. I would challenge that most residents are on a fixed income. Quite a few, yes, but definitely not most. And also the idea that small class sizes are an old idea. They're not. They're a new idea. In the past, 10, 20 years ago, our class sizes were much, much larger. One of the questions that I have is about the slide about reductions that have been made over the last 2 years. I think it said 40 staff, and it's my understanding that classroom assistants alone at that 18, 19-hour range were cut 2 grade levels, the equivalent of 2 grade levels across all the elementary schools. So that's alone 36 people, and I'm just wondering if you can share how many people rather than FTEs. I think that would be useful. And maybe during the educator panel, we can hear from staff about what the impact has been, because I know that even those grade levels that lost assistance are not the only grade levels that are impacted, because the remaining assistants are now covering for those upper-level elementary classes. So I'm not in the classroom as much. And I just also want to comment that I have a unique position to be in the classroom and see the impact and the increased workload on the teachers because of the cuts that have been made over the last couple of years. And I can reassure you that on days where there are 1 or 2 students absent, it is a different classroom.
Okay. Lakshmi, can be real quick.
Yeah, so we said this is a budget Saturday, so I was thinking, instead of putting time slots, we should get this topic exhausted and then move on to the others, because this is the most important one that is going to help us.
We have time at the end, and that's what I'm trying to protect. There's time
Yeah,
at the end for us to really
But
discuss.
not everybody is
and
going
we
to be
can-
around all day, right? So,
The committee is the group that's here, and the guests, everybody else knows that time. What I don't want to do is run past 3:30 when we told everybody they could go enjoy the beautiful weather.
but I think talking about numbers is important.
Let's come back to it. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
There's a lot of other relevant information that we need to present so that we can have an educated discussion and deliberation on the numbers. We need to end the day with the numbers, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I've recognized that we're behind. I do want to give, apparently, John Peterson an opportunity to speak to the committee as he meanders up. So if the public could also be respectful of our time, make them quick. If there are comments that have already been said, no need to repeat them. If they're deep, in-depth questions, just recognize we may not be able to answer them immediately. Take it away, John.
Thank you. John Peterson, 6 Jackson Drive, Acton. I've followed the school budget for about 15 years, and the district should be extremely proud of the value that it has provided to the communities over that period of time. That, it's been a challenge because of the resources of the communities to do that, and the district has succeeded. And, I'm confident that you again this year will craft a budget which will allow for success. I wanted to come back to, the point that Sherry made about our reserve position and my longstanding interest in net use of reserves. It is my opinion that the committee could not have anticipated what happened with the health insurance trust, nor could the committee have anticipated what happened in terms of special education tuitions. However, the committee made a conscious decision with respect to its emergency fund. Everybody who gets involved in household budgeting, step one is, how's your emergency fund doing? And over the last several years, the committee consciously and the administration dragged down E&D, which this year results in limited flexibility in how you approach the budgetary problem. So for all of the other issues that you need to deal with, I think as you look at FY25 and the management of FY25, you need to again focus on net use of reserves and what happens to the reserve position at the end of FY25. Thank you.
Thank you. Amanda?
My name is Amanda Bailey. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Acton-Boxborough Special Education Parent Advisory Council. For those folks who may not be familiar with the CPAC, we are a state-mandated organization that advises the district on the education and safety of students with disabilities and participates in special education planning, programming, and feedback. Are we meeting the minimum recommended number of hours for our English learners right now?
No.
How far below are we?
Mary Ann, are you?
Yep, we are.
Do you mind just saying that into the microphone? You just have to remember to turn it on.
Hi. So we are meeting service times at the secondary level, junior high and high school. At the elementary level, no, we're not meeting service times. Students are getting 45 minutes at least. Foundational students, levels 1 to the beginners, probably closer to 60 minutes. But no, we're not meeting the service times at the elementary level. That's why it's so important for us to try to get this aid budget passed.
Thank you, Marianne. I just wanted to follow up on Andrew's comment about caseloads and workloads. My additional comment is around students with disabilities in need, because the faculty to student ratio, the workload goes out the window when we have a child in crisis. When it is all hands on deck, we've got counselors, psychologists, special educators, classroom teachers, and paras bringing a student back into the building or having to evacuate a classroom. Head counts, faculty to student ratios go out the window when we start to examine student need. And with our in-district programs, the needs have increased. I know Jen will speak more to this, but it is absolutely false to draw that comparison. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Okay, now that we're thoroughly 30 minutes behind schedule, we've got a break after this session. I would like to go into special education if we could. I know both mine and Andrew's watch told us about 5 minutes ago we need to stand up, so I might stand up, but we'll hand it over to Jen to talk about special education.
Okay, all right. Is that close enough? Thanks, everyone. So I'm Jennifer Treslow. I'm the Director of Special Education. I'm going to try to make sure I keep up with my slides while I'm talking. So this morning, I hope to do a quick overview of our district special education programs, share information related to our students placed out of district, talk about the benefits of our in-district programs, share a breakdown of circuit breaker, and as well as proposed staffing changes and the implications of the A and B budgets for special education. So just some background information. Special education regulations require that school districts provide services to students with disabilities from the age of 3 until they graduate or turn 22. Our youngest learners are served at the Boardwalk campus in our Carol Hebner Early Childhood Program, located, like I said, at the Boardwalk campus. We're currently servicing about 73 students with disabilities in the program, with about 50 or 60 peers from our community. Our students may receive related services only or full or half-day programming, depending on their IEPs. Some of our students with significant disabilities spend time in a substantially separate classroom, but then are integrated with their peers for parts of the day. One thing I did want to note is that we are seeing a significant increase in the level of need of our youngest learners coming into the district from early intervention. We are seeing students coming to us. Joe starts to learn about students at age 2 sometimes with very significant and intensive services in place that we then need to identify. I'll now talk briefly about the programming for our students across our elementary schools, junior high, and high school. The majority of our students with disabilities receive their services through our learning centers in all of our schools. Students are fully included in their grade level classrooms, and then based on their IEPs, they may receive some services pushed into their classrooms, or they may be pulled out individually or in small groups. As well as receive related services. Some of the services students receive may be writing support, reading support, executive functioning, things like that. Our specialized programs are for students who, in order to access the curriculum and be successful in school, require more specialization services. Students in these programs can be fully included, may spend partial days in programs, or spend the majority of their time in a program. Our K-12 programs include the Compass program, which is at McCarthy Town, R.J. Gray, and at the high school. This program is for students with social, emotional, and mental health challenges. Services that they may receive include some self-awareness, social awareness, coping skills, relationship skills. Students also receive counseling and related services, as well as academic support as needed. Our Connections program is located at the Conant School, at R.J. Gray, and at the high school, and this program is for students with developmental delays, autism, and/or social communication challenges. The students receive instruction in social pragmatics, communication, emotional regulation, and again, academic support as needed. Our Pathways program is located at Blanchard and this year expanded up to R.J. Gray. This program is for students with autism, intellectual impairments, and/or related neurological or health impairments. Students have significant learning needs and require complex supports, including intensive behavioral and communication support using the principles of applied behavior analysis. Students often require substantially separate academic classes and may participate in some of the content areas in their classrooms and electives. We also have a language-based program. It's called Language and Beyond, which is located at the Douglas School and at R.J. Gray. This program is for students identified with specific learning disabilities or dyslexia and communication disorders. It is a highly structured language-based program where students require specialized instruction in reading, language arts, and math. At the secondary level, we have additional programs to support students with complex learning profiles as well. At the junior high, we have Secondary Transition Education Program, also known as STEP, for students with complex learning needs. And again, students require some sub-separate academic classes, but are included in electives and content areas as appropriate and based on their IEPs. The Horizons program at the high school is for students with specific learning disabilities and communication impairments. Students need support with academic content as well as communication, self-advocacy, and transition planning. Our Occupational Development Program, or ODP, is also at the high school. This program supports students with a wide range of disabilities, including intellectual disabilities, autism, and social-emotional challenges. This is a highly individualized program that may include separate academic classes, as well as inclusion in some content areas or electives. Transition planning and vocational opportunities may also be embedded in students' programming within ODP. And lastly, our Practical Academic and Community Education program, also known as PACE, is our program for students who are ages 18 to 22. This is for students who have completed their high school experience but need continued instruction based on their disabilities to support independence, vocational skills, and daily living skills. Students participate in functional classroom instruction as well as employment opportunities. I'm now going to transition a little bit to talk more about our out-of-district placements. So despite all of our supports and programs, there are some students whose needs cannot be met in the Acton-Boxborough schools, and those students attend programs and services and schools outside of the district. Students in our out-of-district placements range from 3 years old to 22 years old. Our students attend a range of programs. As you can see there, some of our students attend collaboratives, which is when towns in a particular region join together to provide programming for students, and we are a member of the CASE Collaborative. These programs are often located in schools where students continue to have inclusion opportunities in addition to their specialized supports. Some students attend private day schools, and for some students who, as a result of their disabilities, require intensive 24-hour supports, we have some students who attend residential schools. You can see that our tuitions range from about $59,000 to over $500,000. We are also required to provide transportation for students placed in out-of-district schools. We'll talk about transportation in a few more slides, but there's some general information about the transportation there. And we also wanted to note that in addition, some of the students attending the out-of-district schools require additional supports in order to be successful in those placements. They might require a one-to-one assistant, in some instances a nurse, and specialized equipment in order to access their programming. I'll now share a little information about additional specialized transportation that the district is responsible for, specifically related to McKinney-Vento or homeless students. Students who are experiencing homelessness are protected by the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. This requires that districts provide transportation from where students are living back to their schools. In previous years, our students experiencing homelessness were living either in Acton or Boxborough or in towns close by. Over the past several years, there have been challenges. Students have been have had to move further away. Families do not necessarily, if they are in a shelter system, do not necessarily have a choice about which shelter, excuse me. I knew my cold was going to come hit right as I was talking. Excuse me. As I was saying, families don't necessarily have a choice about which shelter they are part of, and we as a result have had to transport students back here. In previous years, because they were living close by, we budgeted about $8,000 for this transportation service. This year, we've budgeted $135,000. There have been significant challenges in identifying drivers due to the driver shortage to be able to pick up these routes. And you'll see in a few minutes that we do get reimbursement for some of our McKinney-Vento transportation costs. As previously mentioned, we are a member of CASE Collaborative, which transports students for our in-district and our out-of-district programs. CASE is currently transporting about 143 of our students with an average cost around $12,000 or so. At one point in previous conversations, the district did consider looking for a different vendor through a request for an RFP process, but we had a meeting with CASE, and after looking at the information we had and talking with them, we determined that it would not be cost-effective to change vendors. The CASE pricing is competitive, and we would not get that rate with a different company after doing some exploration. Our next slides briefly describe the benefits of providing services to as many students with disabilities as possible in Acton-Boxborough. The educational and social value of having students educated in their communities with their peers is immeasurable. The economic value of creating these programs allows us to avoid out-of-district tuitions and the transportation costs. This slide is a very high-level look at the total costs and per-student costs of 3 of our specialized programs. We took this information and compared this to out-of-district programs that serve students with similar profiles. These numbers, it should be noted, do not include the transportation costs, but I think it's in the best, this information shares that it's in the best interest of students and our district to maintain programs and supports for students with disabilities. I'm going to attempt to talk about circuit breaker. I have to laugh for a minute because Peter created these slides. We're calling these Peter's People because I told Peter that I would give him the information and he would make it pretty, and that's what he did. So circuit breaker is very complicated, and so I'm glad I have other people here to help me talk about it because it's something that I just know and I can't always articulate it very well. But so anyway, circuit breaker provides financial assistance to public school districts to offset the cost of delivering high-cost special education services to students. The reimbursements are provided based on the tuitions that we pay, the specialized services that I've mentioned, such as nursing, and for associated out-of-district programs. It should be noted that that reimbursement comes the year after the costs have occurred. The threshold for this year is about $51,000, and this threshold is set at approximately 4 times the state average per pupil expenditure. So that's where they come up with that number. The district is responsible for all costs up to that threshold amount, and then over that, the district is responsible for 25%, and the state reimburses for up to 75% of the costs above the threshold. These next slides are Peter's visual representation of the district's responsible costs in students in 3 different types of placements for out-of-district. The first is a collaborative day program where the placement cost is about $70,000. And you'll see in the breakdown that the district is responsible for about 80% of the cost of a student attending a collaborative program. This is the breakdown of a student attending a private day program. And again, you can see the district share is about 53% of the cost. And lastly, this is a student attending a residential program where the district share is about 37% of the total cost of the student services. And again, these slides do not include transportation. Briefly going to talk about our transportation reimbursement. The district is also able to claim transportation costs through the circuit breaker program when we've incurred costs over the threshold amount. We are reimbursed for about 57% of the eligible costs in FY23. The state also reimburses us for our McKinney-Vento transportation. This program does not have a threshold like circuit breaker, but rather is claimed through our end-of-year reporting. We expect to be reimbursed at the end of this year for about 80% of McKinney-Vento transportation costs. So this slide indicates our changes in special education staffing for next year. Due to our budget situation and our costs, we will be reducing the Assistant Director of Special Education position. In addition, as previously mentioned, we have a group of students coming up from the preschool who will be joining our Pathways program at Blanchard. With no students rising to the junior high program, we will need to add a classroom to support these students. In looking at efficiencies and caseloads, we are able to reallocate a special education teacher and assistant FTEs to create this new classroom. At the secondary level, we'll also be reducing ABA tutor and a special education based on IEPs. Briefly, this slide shows the impact of the A and B budgets on special education services and supports. As noted, we will be reducing the assistant director, we'll be reallocating special education teacher and assistants across levels. It should be noted in the A budget that we'll also be reducing the Assabet Valley support program, family support program in the A budget. This is a program that provides families with wraparound services to support mental and behavioral needs. And in the B budget, in addition to those other reductions, we'll also be reducing the Cartwheel program in the B budget, which currently is our platform where students can receive counseling remotely from home or from school. And we are expected to service about 300 families through our Cartwheel program this year. And the loss of this program would be significant.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, to the committee first. Questions? We're going to go this way. Ginny, and then Tori, and then Lakshmi, and then Andrew.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is just about the students represented by the different colors that you called Peter's people. I just want to go back to these, just to the next slide, please. Okay, so this, when you say a collaborative day program, and I correct that that is a day program that occurs in the district?
No, good question. Collaboratives are groups of districts that come together, but a collaborative is out of district. It's considered out of district, even though we have 2 case classrooms at the Boardwalk campus. It is considered an out of district placement.
Okay, so that does include services delivered in the district, but they're considered out of district services? Because they're at the Boardwalk campus?
No, all 3 examples are for out-of-district placements.
They're all out of district.
Okay.
And so they have, like, if a student is attending one of the case classrooms, it's the case speech pathologist that comes and does the services. It's not our clinicians that would do the services in those classrooms.
Okay, I see. So I just wanted to pause on these because if you're just looking at the colors, it looks like, this is a bad deal for us because the district is absorbing all of the red and all of the yellow, and there's only a little bit of blue. But when you actually look at the numbers, and I know we're pressed for time, but I think it's really important to note that the bottom line numbers of the district share, even though the percentage of state reimbursement is more, making the blue bigger, that it's actually more expensive for the district. So I just wanted to note that. Is that correct? Okay. And I also just want to make sure that everybody is aware of this, because there are a lot of people who are not, that all of these costs are absorbing in terms of the district's share are all state laws that drive these costs, that are not optional, on the part of the district in terms of, this level of funding is not something, how we provide those services is up to the district, but the requirement to provide these services to special education students is a state mandate that is to greater and lesser extents unfunded, just like transportation. So everybody should think about that when you're thinking about our state delegation and our state government. So that's more a comment I get. Then my other question is with regard to your statement that the preschool program is experiencing 2-year-olds and young students coming with larger needs. I just wanted to ask what that looks like in terms of the demand for resources, in terms of both personnel, what's going on in those classrooms, and maybe that's for the educator panel, but also in terms of the dollars that represents in our budget this year and maybe next year. Thank you.
I know that Joe is here, and he can probably speak firsthand as to what that's looking like. Do you want to add? I mean, I know Joe is in touch with the local early intervention agencies, and we're really experiencing students with very significant needs, and that's why I had mentioned that Joe starts learning about those students sometimes at age 2.
Jenny, so what's specifically your question?
What that looks like, what are those needs when we're just saying that there's an increase? Just briefly, what is that looking like coming your way in terms of the early education program?
So if there's a student with a suspected disability that's between birth and age 3, if they're identified as needing services, they would be getting services from the Department of Public Health through an early intervention program. And we interact with mainly Minuteman Early Intervention, which is based in Concord. And we would, as a district, start getting referrals around between age 2 and 2.9. And based on conversations that I have with the family, as well as early intervention workers, a decision whether we do a referral for special education would happen. And there's some students who have had, over the last few years, have had complex needs, medical needs, significant mobility challenges, nursing challenges that we've not been able to meet their programming needs in district when they've turned 3. So that's some of the young children and families that I start interacting with around when those children are age 2, if they live in Acton and Boxborough. I don't know if that answered what you're looking for, or if you want any more specifics.
So is what Jen is saying that you're having more kids show up with greater needs overall?
Just in general, I mean, this is my, 28th year in public preschool education. I've been in public schools as a preschool educator and early childhood coordinator for a long time. That's been most of my career in public ed, and the needs of our preschool age students are much more complex than they were 30 years ago when I started in public education. Much more medically complex, developmentally complex, neurological disabilities and challenges. So I would say from birth to 3, there's a lot more students with more complex challenges, but we're also seeing that from ages 3 to 5 as well.
Tori.
So thank you for that in-depth analysis on the in-district programs and the cost of out-of-district placement. I had just done kind of a wave tops, personnel costs and special ed costs added together, and was guessing that would be what it looked like, but it's nice to see it laid out with some thorough analysis. A question I have is, if I did my math right, it looks like of the 25 personnel cuts that we're looking at in the A budget right now, 6 of those are coming out of special education. And I'm just wondering where we're at with caseloads and our ability to meet our legal requirements, especially as I read some of the building summaries, and that, you know, our principals have some real concerns about, about our ability to continue to serve our students.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was that's some of the information that we looked at with our principals and our special education leaders in terms of, there's a range of caseloads. We have some educators that are seeing, you know, may have a caseload of about 8 or 9 students, and some that may have it, you know, closer to 18 or 19. And so we really looked broadly across all of them to see where we could increase efficiencies, and in looking at how we group students in classrooms and how we're grouping students for services, we do feel we'll still be able to meet the needs of our students.
Just, Tori, if I can elaborate a little. We're going to talk about this when we get actually to the A and B budget updates later. But we did really look at the caseloads and talk to our principals. You know, we had proposed reducing, you know, 2 actual special education teacher positions at the elementary level in particular. And then there were a number of assistant positions that we wanted to change over to ABA trainers for the Pathways classroom that we're going to need. Of those 2 special educator positions, we have decided to bring 1 back into the budget, but when we looked at our kindergarten programming, we can actually go down a section in kindergarten and still maintain the school committee guidelines in the reasonable middle range of the school committee guidelines for kindergarten. And bring back that 1 special education position. The other position is attached to a sub-separate program in a school that doesn't actually have sufficient enrollment to warrant 2 classrooms anymore after this year. And so what we're actually doing is going down 1 classroom in that sub-separate program. The students would be served in the other classroom, ratios are appropriate, caseload needs, everything else, and that would be the other reduction. So just to clarify, and then there is certainly, you know, a switch from, you know, the special education assistants to the ABA trainers. I know that's the case. You know, knowing that we incurred additional special education costs this year after the budget was set, it's certainly something that I think about a lot. You know, we're going to have to really watch carefully, but I think it's a reasonable switch at this point in time.
And then just one follow-up question as well. We talk about positions, but finding people to fill them is a challenge. And you know, one of the positions that jumped out at me as I was looking at revolving funds, I didn't know ODP has a revolving fund, and I noticed that there were, that line was zeroed out. I'm wondering if some of these unfilled positions, if we're still planning to hire for them, having seen kind of the process of if a position isn't filled, that's been one that's eliminated. How are we doing with our special ed hiring, and do we still think we're going to be able to find the people we need? And that might be an Andrew question as well.
Well, I think we are planning to hire for all of the positions that we have open right now, including the ODP position. As I've talked about with our CPAC, that for various reasons, when we have special education teachers who resign in the middle of the year, it can be very challenging to hire people to fill those positions. So we move people around, we readjust schedules, but we are continuing to hire for those positions. I think our principals and our special education leaders can talk about how difficult it can be to hire, and we start early and we keep going all the way through the summer, so we anticipate doing that again this summer as well.
Lakshmi?
I have 2 questions, but I think the one question that I had, I think Ginny pretty much got the answer. I'll leave the rest to talk about it to the educators panel. This one that I have left over from that is, do we do the basic minimum for these kids with needs, or do we go beyond, a little more beyond, to help these kids for real?
So the decisions around what services and how much services students get are part of the team process. And so that is very individualized based on the student's disability and, you know, the evaluations that our educators and related service providers conduct in order to determine where those areas of need are. And I would say we definitely provide each student with what they need, but I think it's hard to articulate what is the basics, like what is, that, because again, it's very individualized based on the student's disability. So I think it's hard to say that.
Yeah, so I was wondering if a feedback loop is built into it, where you develop an IEP, you evaluate, and then see if it's effective or not, and come back to it, not just a baked-in IEP because state mandates it. Do we go
Right.
back to it?
Yeah. Well, all of our educators take data on the IEP goals that have been developed for students, and are using that data to determine if it's appropriate to reduce the service, or because of a lack of progress, we actually need to increase services. So it's an ongoing conversation at team meetings and at the progress report points at times. So you were going to add something.
And just from a process standpoint, there's an evaluation period that the student would go through to be identified with a disability. Once they're identified with a disability, there's a team process that includes educators at the school who know the student, as well as the family, sitting at the table making decisions. Once they create an IEP, the district is responsible for implementing those services. Along the way, the district takes data about student progress around that. There's periodic progress reporting to families over the course of the year. There's also an annual reconvene of the same team to speak with the family about progress. They evaluate whether the student has made sufficient progress, is not making progress, is making better than expected progress, and they make adjustments to the IEP at those annual meetings. And then every 3 years, there's a reevaluation period as well that goes through with more expansive testing and assessment. So there's a lot of checks and balances along the way, and very data-driven process around any service delivery in special education.
So we get assessed by state exams, right? SATs, MCATs, whatever, right? What is there to assess our IEP program? How good we are? Where do we stand in the state?
I'll take that. There's no ranking in the state around IEP service delivery. What I will say is the best data that, the public might look at typically is going to be, when you look at MCAS data and you see proportional outcomes. So, I didn't bring the slide with me, but we showed that, our students with IEPs are disproportionately underserved relative to their peers in school, as well as some of our other subgroups as well. So I think, the state does report on progress, and quite honestly, the accountability system is designed to weight not only the aggregate of all students' progress toward annual goals, but it does also weight all of your groups, including students with disabilities, progress toward those goals.
So that's the only line item where we get to see
It's broken out there, and quite honestly, within the district, we have a complex system of assessment as well, where we use different screening tools periodically, as well as diagnostic assessments with our students, and so we're able to also monitor progress, and that's part of that MTSS process, quite honestly, that we've talked about, is that idea of collecting data around student progress along the way, and then, we'll talk about the idea of, an instructional support team in a school and grade level data teams that actually are periodically, typically about every 8 or 9 weeks, looking at progress around student data and talking with colleagues around what types of services and supports they want to provide to different students within a grade level or classroom based on the educational data that they're collecting. So that's really the system. I mean, implementing MTSS is not special education, and it includes special education, if that makes sense. It's one process.
Okay, the last question. On the costs, we are eliminating an elementary special ed teacher. What's the impact of that in budget A?
So as I said, we are reallocating that FTE. We're taking that because we have a program that has a lower number of students who are requiring those services right now. We're taking that. The students are still going to be able to have their services. Their needs are going to be met. Instead of in 2 classrooms, we're going to have 1 classroom. And that FTE is then going to help offset the cost for our new classroom.
All right, I'm going to add one piece of color to this, Lakshmi. So we've heard a very well-presented part of this. I would encourage you, if you've got questions, also speak to the CPAC. So this process is very formal and it is very collaborative, but at times there is friction where parts of the team don't agree on what is best for the student. And so I want to be clear that when we say these are legally mandated, yes, it's a legally mandated cost, but there is a great deal of evaluation and negotiation that goes into what actually gets delivered to each student individually. So it's not like, again, we're wildly spending over and saying, yes, you can have whatever it is that you want for your kid or you believe your kid needs. There is a great deal of discussion there, and at times it can be a little friction. Yeah. Andrew.
Thanks. Thank you for the presentation. And I'm curious about the quantity, quality, depth of need and shifts in student issues that have occurred in the past few years, and how fast, or how that impacts our ability as a district to provide those services to our students. More specifically, how have the service needs shifted in the past pandemic-informed years, and how does that affect what we're doing now?
Very good question. I think I joined AB that first year when we were coming out of the pandemic, and I can say with a lot of confidence that many students came back into school very successfully, but we did have a number of students, both with and without disabilities, who came in with significant dysregulation. They were out of their routines. They were not able to really think about being in school. So I think that in that area, we have continued to see small but significant increase of students who require additional behavioral supports and really intensive instruction around self-regulation, especially at the elementary level. In addition, we saw significant increases in students' mental health needs. And so that's why when we talk about, the cartwheel program, things like that, that's why we've really seen increased needs of families being able to access those, because we saw that students were waiting and having significant wait lists for services. And I'm sure that some of our educators are going to talk about that as well. And so I think, those two pieces are really what has impacted things the most.
All right, questions from town boards and committees? None. Questions from the public, comments from the public? Please step up to the mic.
Hello? Yep. So the Blanchard principal just stepped out, so I'll ask you, Jen. Have we been fully staffed on ABA support staff at Pathways at the elementary level at all this year? Fully?
Fully, no. We have had openings that we have consistently been trying to fill. We have been using staff from agencies who have the same training in order to fill. It's just been very challenging positions to fill.
Thank you for that. And I just want to underscore that special education is about appropriate, not best. We don't get best, we get appropriate. And so we're not getting anything above and beyond in order for our kids to access the curriculum. One of my other questions was around the Pathways expansion to the high school in FY26. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the needs there and anticipating those costs as well.
So yes, so our current 7th graders are going to be in 8th grade next year. And so we are going to be starting to have conversations with the high school about, their transition. We will look carefully at, sort of FTEs that we do have at the high school in terms of anticipating what their needs are, but our students in our Pathways program it's a very unique program, and I do anticipate we will need to add because we will need to think about the model that works best for those students, in addition to the additional related services and potential BCBA support. But I can see those being anticipated as adds, but I don't have specific dollars yet.
No. And then my other just sort of, comment or question was if you wanted to look at the mental health impact for students with disabilities. I know the absenteeism data was presented, I think, at the last school committee meeting by subgroup. Peter, I don't know if you want to just brush on that.
Yeah, I think, chronic absenteeism is one of the bigger challenges that the school district is facing over the last several years. It's a statewide and national trend. However, it's actually pretty acute in Acton-Boxborough, and while the state and national trends have actually started to kind of peak and come off of that, we have seen our chronic absenteeism rates continue to rise. It's really hard for students to make any effective progress if we first can't get them into school. And, you know, that is probably the number one barrier to student progress is being absent from school. I think the mental health aspect of that can't be understated. It's not, you know, I think the prior model of how we all looked at any type of behavioral challenge that students experience, and I'd put absenteeism as a behavioral challenge, it was a student problem, as opposed to there's a challenge that can actually be remedied with the right strategies when they're implemented. And I think as we've gotten more complex in our understanding of that, we've recognized that we can intervene effectively. We're really, you know, thinking now this year that that has to be, you know, one of the top things that we address next year is the chronic absenteeism, and that's going to require significant mental health support, work on the part of our counselors, work on the part of our administrators, to make sure that we're really working with the families directly to try and get the kids back into school.
So we're already behind the 8 ball when it comes to the chronic absenteeism related to mental health, and we're about to see cuts to mental health supports, even in the A budget.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that that was the case otherwise, but, you know, quite honestly, I think the most direct tie to that I can think is an A budget reduction would be the Assabet Valley wraparound service. You know, we only use that for about 30 students at a time, which is why we said if we have to choose between Cartwell and Assabet Valley, we have to pick one. But that is for the 30 most intensive family needs in the district, to provide in-home therapies, in-home supports, wraparound assistance to try and help remediate some of those challenges. So yeah, we're certainly, you know, at a point after a few years of reductions where we're now whittling away at some of the critical supports that some of our students and families need.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. It is 10:50 according to that clock on the wall. We're going to take a 10-minute break and come back at 11 a.m. There are restrooms out and to the right, and there are some to the left up the ramp, around to the left as well. Back in 10 minutes. Thank you. I would like to call us back to order, please. My apologies for letting us go overtime, particularly after I got several comments during the break about my efforts to keep us on time. So, as everybody finds their seats again, we are back from break, and we're going to have a session on administration and instructional leadership. I would encourage everyone who's curious about our administrative costs and what everybody on our administrative team does to pay attention to this. There's clearly a lot of concerns about the amount of administration that we have in our district, and this session is meant to be responsive to those concerns so that we can all very clearly articulate the money that we're spending on our amazing administrative team, who I am somehow sandwiched in between. So I'll hand it over to you, Peter, and then slyly.
All right, thanks, Adam. Way to take the temperature down on that for all of us. Thank you. So we want to talk about administration and leadership, and I think, you know, one of the things we want to do is you know, number one, talk about what different roles do in the district and make sure that we're coming from a shared understanding as a community around, you know, not only what administrators do, but also what do our instructional leaders in various capacities do in the district. So we're going to talk about a variety of roles. We also want to approach this transparently and make sure that there's good facts around, you know, the positions that we have in our schools, what those costs are, associated with them, and then be able to, you know, obviously answer any questions that come up. We are talking about these overall 3 areas of our per pupil spending. You know, administration is typically, you know, from the school committee through the district offices level. When we talk about instructional leadership, we're talking about people in schools who are working, you know, directly with teachers and working directly with students in many cases. And then in professional development, I also brought this in because oftentimes we are talking about our coaching program that we have at the elementary level, which, you know, I think, you know, until I dug into this data, I would have thought would have been under the instructional leadership category, and it's actually in the professional development category. Now, I'm using this because I think, you know, the fact that we spend 8.3% below state average actually creates a point of comparison within the district budget too about relative priorities for spending. So if you see something that's above that 8.3%, you can see that we have prioritized that. And if you see something below, it's an area that we've chosen, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to de-emphasize or deprioritize. So I just want to, draw attention to that and also put kind of a label to how staff positions are categorized within DESE reporting. Leaders have a variety of roles that they fill. They have legal and compliance roles, and if you were coming in, you might have seen that we put out a little packet for people. It should have been on tables for school committee members or town finance committee or select board members, but then we also had some for the public about what has changed just in the last 20 years, which happens to be the period of time since the last override. What's changed in education from a regulatory standpoint. And so hopefully that, sheds a little light on the level of compliance that schools have come under. Outside of healthcare, education is now considered, I believe, the second most heavily regulated industry, potentially finance, but some might argue that finance might need more. So, it's obviously a major part of the job, but there's also coordination of programs and departments within the district. If we have our departments all operating as independent entities, you lose sight of the mission and what you're actually trying to do for students, because it's actually about how the system supports kids. It's not about any one individual within the system trying to be a hero. It's actually a complex system that has to work together. It's a lot like dancing. If you have, two dance partners trying to dance together and they're dancing different songs and different steps, it's not coordinated. It doesn't look right. And that's the experience that our kids receive without coordination. Strategic planning and implementation. This is obviously very heavy at the district level, whereas goal development and execution happens within schools and departments. You have human resources management, supervision, and evaluation. Instructional leadership, you have curriculum development, you have student support, both direct and indirect, from a lot of our assistant principals and other roles actually are student-facing, as well as family-facing. So you have family engagement, community engagement, and then you have the overall tending to the climate and culture of the school and of the district as well. Just talk first about how central office is organized, and I have a couple of slides. Since I've been here, I've been gradually trying to think of the central office as organized into two primary functions, an academic function and an operational side of the district as well. So we have an assistant superintendent who functions as the chief academic officer of the district, and other senior level positions include a director of educational technology, director of special education, and a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You will see the types of programs that they're responsible for within the district underneath that, and then you actually see what I'm just referring to for a common language as program administrators, because they have a very specific, clear role. So we have a coordinator of multilingual education. We have an assistant director of special education currently. We have special education coordinators and related service providers for occupational therapy, things like that. We also have a coordinator of social emotional learning, mental and behavioral health. And then we have mental health leadership team that is very much school-based and level-based. And you can see some of the other staff and support positions that exist as well. On the operational side of the district, we have a deputy superintendent who's kind of like a chief operating officer, although I will say our director of finance and operations is an extraordinarily critical job in a district of our size, particularly for a regional district. We also have a director of community education. And then you can see the various programs that fall under them. Everything from operations, which is, everything from school buses to, windows and doors and roofs and air conditioning and heating and everything else for facilities. We have food services, we have community education, human resources, and nursing. And then you see our other program administrators as well within this matrix, as well as the various actual staff positions at the central office that support the entire district. From a central office leadership standpoint, I'll talk briefly to this side. You can see what we currently have. You can also see what we now don't have. Just to be clear, and actually, Lakshmi, this might be a little bit responsive to what you were talking about. It's not on a timeline, but I believe it was 3 years ago now, When I came into the district, the superintendent of schools had 2 administrative assistants that were considered executive level administrative assistants. One of those was school committee side only, as a full-time position. The other was just to the superintendent of schools. We also had a number of other administrative assistant positions at the district level. We reduced 2 of those to create another senior level position called the Director of Special Projects. That took on responsibility for public records requests, data across the district, the ability to manage surveys to families and communities, production of annual reports, things like that. Communications in both internal and external was all managed through that Director of Special Projects position. But it was, we arrived at that by reducing 2 other positions at the time. With our deputy superintendent retirement last year, we were able to reduce the special project position through attrition and appoint Andrew into the deputy superintendent role. And then we also, for a long time, since I believe before regionalization, had a director of operations in addition to a director of finance. They were both considered senior cabinet level positions. Our director of operations 2 years ago was able to find another job in the university system in Massachusetts. They went off to that, and at the time, we chose not to fill it. So this actually goes into the state reporting piece when Andrew talked about personnel. We didn't fill that position 2 years ago. So from a DESE reporting standpoint, it looks like that's when it was reduced, even though it was a budgeted position. But the following year, we reduced it in the budget. So from our standpoint, now we see it as a budget reduction. But we've essentially eliminated 2 positions at the central office level from cabinet. And you can see what we have left. And then, you can see total value of what we spend on personnel at the district office. I did put on all of these slides, we have some staff that work a full year, which is considered 260 days. We have other people that we have recognized they may not need a full year contract. So they're on fewer days contracts. That allows us to manage the budget and make sure that we have staff allocated in the time we actually need them here, as opposed to necessarily employing full-time. It also, and I'm so sorry to our staff, but avoids, if someone leaves the district, large payouts of vacation time and things like that. Because if someone's less than a full year position, they're not necessarily receiving the vacation time in addition. In central office, I'll maybe let Deb talk to this, the teaching and learning side, a little bit of what your organization is.
There is a coordinator of SEL. That's only 0.6 of her job. The remainder of her position is the elementary psychological chair. And so that is quite a unique position in terms of many, many different functions and roles in the district. Our multilingual coordinator, we've had to increase that position to full-time last year when the district went from a low-incident district to a high-incidence district, and that's just based on enrollment, and again, servicing all the students and all their different levels of WIDA. The last couple of years have also seen us not able to fill the Director of Visual Arts and the Director of PE and Health positions. Right now, we only have a Director of Performing Arts. And so what we did was we were able to create liaison positions at the different levels. So those are teachers taking on additional responsibilities for their departments, running department meetings. But it is something that then falls to my role to oversee those 2 departments. And so those 2 departments do not have leaders content specific to their work.
Other district-wide administrative positions, an athletic director, any district our size, you really need an athletic director. Our athletic director helps out with a lot of our junior high school programs, but also is really focused on high school athletics. And, it is a massive undertaking to coordinate athletics at a high school level, and so that's a necessary position. Food services manager is also something that we have. I think there's sometimes question about food services at a district level. When Massachusetts went to free meals, that means that, there's no costs to the district for the role of anything in food services. That's all paid for through that statewide free meals program and the food services revolving account. So even though we're listing this as a district-wide administrative position, this is not something that sits in the general operating budget. It sits outside of the operating budget. And then similarly, Director of Community Education, Erin does an amazing job coordinating community education and providing a variety of opportunities for both extended daycare as well as summer programming, after-school activities, clubs, even adult programming within the community. That position, it's a district-wide leadership position at a senior level, but it's funded outside the operating budget through revenue. And she's very much like a profit-making venture of the district. And then Director of Health Services, I'll talk about briefly. We have, long time had 2 nurse leaders who are retiring at the end of this year. They are half-time nurse leaders and half-time school nurses. That's an incredibly important position. We have, students with very, very complex medical needs in all of our schools. Oftentimes, when leaders split time as direct services and leadership, it means that they're pulled in 2 opposite directions. We actually think that we can provide better support by creating 1 nurse leader position and 1 actual school nurse position that can really serve as that floating nurse, and we can send out as needed. So we're proposing to actually combine the 2 leadership elements into 1 role and separate out a school nurse role. It's cost neutral, it's FTE neutral, but we believe it's going to provide a better level of both administration over the nursing program and support, as well as for the actual nursing functions that we need to do facing kids. I will also say, and you can see right up above that, we reduced the Director of Physical Education and Health. Health education is an incredibly important topic, as is physical education for students. One of the things we see an opportunity to do, our school nurses and nurse leaders have long been involved in helping to plan health education, so it's done from a science-based perspective. We actually believe that giving over supervision of the health education program to this nurse coordinator is very appropriate. So we're moving in that direction as well. So it's actually serving to fill, if we don't have someone in that role, in supervision over a health education program, there's an entire portion of a curriculum that has no supervision or development. And we know that as DESE released new frameworks for health education, that's going to be an important thing to be considering as we move forward. So that's just, I wanted to talk a little bit because it is a different position than we've had and a different look, but I want to also talk about how we got to it and why. Where I have 2 computers, I'm going to have to remember which one I should touch to advance the slide. Special education, I'll let Jen talk to this.
So yes, as you can see, these are the positions that are part of our special education leadership team. The assistant director position has been eliminated for next year. Our out-of-district coordinator is a critical position. Matt Kidder is the liaison for all students who are placed out of district. He handles and manages transportation and specialized needs and does lots of problem solving and liaising with families constantly. Our early childhood coordinator, Joe Gibowitz, he coordinates programming for our youngest learners, and as you heard, he quite often starts meeting these students and families when they're turning 2. He also coordinates and is part of communicating with our district regional preschools that are around in our neighborhoods as well. The special education coordinators in our buildings are administrators that oversee all special education programming in their schools. They act as part of the administrative team. They're supporting new teachers, supervising and evaluating teachers, and connecting with families as well. The high school special education coordinator for this year is currently filled internally, but is budgeted for the FY25 budget. And at the elementary level, 2 of our specialized programs have additional FTE and special education coordinators assigned to them due to the high needs of the program and the students.
Just want to talk a little bit about special education leadership from a superintendent perspective. As we've added special education coordinators, the best analogy I can give you to what a building-based special education coordinator does is if you pretend you're in Holland below sea level and you spring a hole in a wall, right? And, you start having parts of that wall pour through, and our special education coordinators, in addition to, managing, probably on the order of hundreds of IEP meetings a year, are also responding to student behaviors in schools. They are supporting individual students in classrooms if they have a need that exceeds what a teacher might be able to do for an intervention with a student. They're behavior planning with individuals, they're meeting with families, they're constantly on the phone trying to navigate, a lot of tricky situations that come up. If students have to transition between an in-district placement and out-of-district placement, they're doing a lot of the liaison work between the school and our out-of-district coordinator to make sure that that's a thoughtful and coordinated process. These are incredibly complex positions. And then, the assistant director level position arose because last year, at this time, we actually were really struggling around special education leadership and realizing that we weren't providing the level of support we needed, particularly around programs for students. We talked a lot in the return on investment analysis about the different programs that we had in district for students. Those also require leadership. You can't just say that you're going to take the highest needs students in your district and put them in a classroom with a teacher and everything is going to be successful. There's a lot of coordination around the types of services, making sure that people have the appropriate planning and development activities, that there's structures to the programs that support students. Our building level coordinators were doing that, but what we also found is there's no one who had the ability to look across the district other than the special education director. And for a special education, one person in a special education office to be able to work on 8 schools at a time and be the central calling point for every high profile case that might come in is incredibly challenging. We also had gaps in supervision of like counseling and even something as granular as just producing student records when requesting from a parent, to analyzing circuit breaker reserves and making sure that we're getting the maximum out of our circuit breaker reimbursement, our Medicaid reimbursement. These are all the jobs that fall under a special education director, and for one person to be able to do that at a district level is not a sustainable path. When we hired 2 very, very experienced special education directors to come in from an outside and take a look, and what they said is, you don't have enough coordinators to think across your programs, and you really need more support in terms of special education administration. That was the program evaluation that led us to believe we needed the assistant director position. We did fund that for 1 year temporarily through circuit breaker. Last year at this time, we thought we had sufficient circuit breaker reserves to really kind of bring about 20 to 30% of that position back into the budget every year over a number of years. It's a necessary position in our district. It's absolutely critical that we have it. However, because circuit breaker is in the position that it's in, we don't have sufficient funding to be able to do that and can't add it to the budget. So, even though, it's been listed in both the A and B budgets, sometimes people think, well, if you listed it in the A budget, it must be expendable. That is absolutely not the case. I want to make sure that everyone understands we're into that place of hard decisions on all of our budgets, and we're giving up a lot of coordination around special education that we didn't have, that was leading to a lot of challenges for us as a district. So I just want to make sure we're clear about what the need was, and that's not a reduction that we take lightly.
So just to continue around our special education and related services. So we have an elementary psychology coordinator. This position, as mentioned earlier, is combined with the SEL mental and behavioral health position. So Heather supports all of the elementary psychologists. In addition, she's also really key in consulting with building principals and staff around all students. Our secondary psychology chair carries a caseload of students and also coordinates psychological services at the junior high and the high school. Our elementary and secondary counseling heads also carry caseloads and support the counselors across the schools. It should be noted that all of those first 4 positions are also part of the mental health leadership team, along with a representative from the junior high, and are really leading our work around supporting the mental and behavioral health needs of our district. One of our BCBAs this year receives a stipend to help coordinate the group meetings. BCBAs are able to come together for some professional learning and also liaising with the special education leadership. We also have a speech and language coordinator who oversees the 22 speech pathologists across our district, sometimes providing coverage when possible during leaves and supports professional learning and program development. And lastly, our motor department chair carries a caseload of students and coordinates our OTs and PTs across all schools and programs in the district.
Joni?
Go ahead.
So at this point, we've asked 3 of our building principals to offer a little bit more of a narrative around building-based administrative models and also roles and responsibilities. I will say that the slides that we presented and then that we'll ask the principals to add on, these slides themselves are very one-dimensional. They offer sort of the technical contours of an administrative model. I think what therefore we wanted the actual principals and administrators to come in is to really add contour, shape, and more 3-dimension around it. We can talk about bullet points of here's your role, here's the responsibility, here are the numbers, here are things like that. And yet, I think to really offer an understanding, when you do address a case of a student who has a global set of needs, what does that look like? What is the time expended? What are the tasks involved? What's the scope of that work? And so that's what I think we're asking all of them to do. I think, I have the good fortune. I started in AB as an assistant principal, then I was a principal, and then now in central office. I think for me, really, the key to successful schools really is a high-functioning building-based administrative team. They are really at the intersection of everything that happens. And so I'm hoping that what they'll be able to share now offers you a little bit more, complicate your thinking a bit on what their roles and responsibilities are. I do think that a lot of us may have grown up in settings where we see sort of movies like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where you have an assistant principal who just writes cut slips behind a desk. That is far from the reality of the role. They are indeed probably the most public-facing, student-facing, family-facing, service provider-facing roles that we have in the district. They have to deal with the tyranny of the urgent every day, and adjust and pivot in ways that I think are hard to fully appreciate. So I'm going to hopefully see if they can add a little bit of contour to that. So I'll give it to Joni.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm Joni Dean, and I'm the principal at the high school. I'll give a little background of the 6 positions here. I want to share that these high school admin positions all existed with different titles, perhaps, but prior to regionalization, but they've all existed since that time. 2 were Dean of Student positions, and we moved them to assistant principal positions in FY23. And our data manager position was changed to the Director of Administration and Planning to reflect responsibilities in FY24. I'll share, in terms of the student-facing nature of this job, that I think it's important to note that we currently have about 1,650 students. And while that is a decrease from our highest enrollment numbers, there are significant changes in needs and supports needed for our students. And I'll say, if you look at our data, and this was shown before, since 2016-17, if you look at our overall high needs population, which combines ML learners, students with disabilities, low income and economically disadvantaged students, that percentage in the high school alone has grown from 16.3 to 24.3%. And that's really an important part of everyone in the school's job, but also the coordination in particular of our assistant and associate principals. We have 4 APs, assistant and associate principals. APs are the cornerstone of our work to make such a large school, such a large high school, feel much smaller and have some of the characteristics and benefits of a smaller, more individualized approach. And that takes incredible coordination, communication, and effort. Unlike most schools, at AB, our APs don't have any administrative support. And so that means you'll find our APs on a daily basis undertaking a lot of clerical tasks, record keeping, documentation, issuing notices, emails, calls, because there isn't clerical support to support them. You can see on this chart
descriptions of an AP role, I think it might be helpful to describe in a little bit more nuance, as Andrew said, what an AP might be working on in any given day. So our APs start their day with supervision of the building. We have 1,650 students coming into the building. We have many entrances and exits. Our buses drop off about 20 to 25 minutes before school. And we have students in our 3 cafeterias, 3 common areas, and our large Reagan gym. Throughout the day as well, any issues in general supervision of that very large building with 1,615 students in an open campus model where students have free periods in 10th through 12th grade and are able to leave campus in the 11th and 12th grade. All of that is the responsibility of our 4 APs. You'll find APs at the beginning of their day, so once the bell rings, starting to work on attendance from the day before. And you know that attendance is essential in terms of supporting students, and you've heard about chronic absenteeism recently and how we're targeting addressing that. The APs are determining which students were late, missed classes, left early, or didn't attend one of their 6 classes, and not just to assign a consequence, but to then meet with those 5 to 25 students for each AP that first block of the day and talk to them about what happened, why did that happen, how can we support you, issue a consequence which involves a detention if warranted, especially if there's a habit, and then managing that entire detention system, passes, coordination with teachers. You'll then find APs facilitating and conducting AP team meetings. We have in the last 2 to 3 years formed AP teams, again, a way to provide a smaller school approach to our very large school in which a student is paired with 1 counselor and 1 AP, and we have those counselors grouped in 2 to 3s per AP with an adjustment counselor. And you'll find these meetings bi-weekly surrounding issues, discussions of students that have attendance issues, academic concerns, graduation concerns, which is incredibly important in a high school, academic integrity infractions, family communication, and on and on. You may find an AP coordinating an event. For example, last week we had our senior class assembly to start talking about scholarships that they may be able to earn, and then also our events for the rest of the year. Planning that assembly, the community building activities for that class, distributing the information, and supervising the meeting. Often you'll find APs in the IST meeting, which is our instructional support team. These are bi-weekly meetings for students, for the adults to discuss individual students who will need support, specifically prior to a referral to special ed, and this is discussion among counselors, APs, and teachers. You'll then find APs in multiple leadership team meetings, coordinating our campus support, interactions, our athletics, understanding of what's going on in athletics. There's administrative leadership teams, high school leadership teams to discuss school-wide plans for our long-term initiatives, including our most recent and important course leveling work. Advisory is another example of this work. Much of the day of an AP's job will be taken up with student issues, and in particular, student investigations. These can be issues between 2 students, groups of students. Sometimes there's bullying investigations. Sometimes we need to refer situations to our Title IX coordinator. Communication throughout this whole process with students, teachers, and family is incredibly important. Like Andrew said, not just a pass and issuing a consequence, but really the integral nature of the support that's required in such a process. Also, I'll note that the laws in Massachusetts changed in November 2022 in terms of consequences, in particular around when schools can issue suspensions, and it is required that you document and provide restorative alternatives prior to issuing suspensions for students. And so that is, of course, developmentally and educationally appropriate and takes a lot of time and effort and coordination in such a large school. We also coordinate with child services, law enforcement, and again, the Title IX coordinator. You'll find APs visiting classrooms for observations of teachers and support staff, and then having follow-up meetings with teachers about that. Finally, I'd say that we round out our day, or the APs round out their day, with club and after-school events. The management of those events and community engagement. Just this past week, we had the coordination of our faculty meeting on Monday. We had our 8th grade parent night on Wednesday, in which they presented. There was a great welcome dinner for the Resource Center on Thursday night. We had 2 to 3 after-school events this week, primarily focusing on the Lunar New Year, our Asian badminton clubs, our Dear Asian Youth, Korean Language Club, Southeast Asian Student Alliance. They all formed to put on after-school events, and APs are there to help and coordinate and support those student events, which are so important. Several athletic events. We had a large basketball game last night. We have a hockey game tonight. I'll just note that the Director of Administration and Planning helps coordinate all school-wide initiatives. Recent examples, of course, include course leveling and our upcoming community building March Flex Block. This position also oversees the creation of over 1,600 unique schedules that offer a wide range of opportunities to our students. And that's really incredible in such a large school, the flexibility and opportunity for our students in our school. I think you can see why the days fly by. Our high school administration works to support and be in service to our teachers and our students. We put a lot of effort into the coordination, communication in our school to help make it feel smaller, and that is reflected in the student experience. We're really proud of what we do to create a positive and inclusive school. Thanks.
Thanks. We'll turn it over to, we also, you're going to talk about comparables?
Yeah.
One thing that always strikes me with, like the high school in particular, it is the single largest gathering of individuals in the communities of Acton and Boxborough at any one given point, every single day of the year, right? That is the largest number of people gathered in one place in a 300,000 square foot facility at any one time. And so that's a lot of coordination that goes into that. I'll let Andrew elaborate a little.
Just wanted to make sure that there was also a little bit of additional data for the public to sort of digest. I know that in some community dialogue, there have been questions around administrative models. I do think that there has been some information that has been incorrect. So this really is a slide that's trying to, again, clarify different models, where I think one challenge is that different schools have different names for administrators that really carry out the same roles. I've worked in places where they call them deans, housemasters, associate principals, vice principals, assistant principals, essentially that they are all kind of carrying out the similar roles and responsibilities. These are just some comparable districts in terms of their high school enrollment and their administrative models, where we do have information about additional support of those administrators, where they may each have an executive assistant to take care of the clerical pieces, the attendance, things like that. We've added that. So this is just to offer a little bit of anchoring around the conversations that you may or may not have around these models. Now we're just shifting to the junior high, and I'll let Jim Marcotte sort of offer his perspective.
Hi, everyone. It's still morning, so good morning. My name is Jim Marcotte. I'm the principal of RJ Gray. My comments today will reflect my time at RJ Gray, which began as an assistant principal in 2012, and most recently the 2.5 years. Recently, I've been the principal. So some of what I will say is baked into what I used to do, and certainly what my APs do now. And prior to that, I was an assistant principal at the high school and a teacher at the high school, so all of what Joni said rings true and has strong memories for me. Joni and I did coordinate, so I'm not going to repeat the same ideas that she talked about, but specific to the junior high, back in 2017, we moved away from having, at the time, what we called department leaders at the junior high school. They were full-time teachers who taught 5 sections a day. And as a stipend, a significant stipend, they were the observers and evaluators and leaders of their departments, social studies, math, science, et cetera. At the time, and Andrew was the principal then, we had several who were ready to retire, and we knew in a year or two, several more were going to retire. There was no interest for the remaining teachers to say, oh yeah, let me do the full-time job I have plus add on. And so we reinvented that model to, at that time, add a 3rd assistant principal. And at that time, we absorbed all of the observations and evaluations of all professional staff. At the time, we did not include PE or health or visual arts because they had, at the time, their own leader. in the interim, where there have been no leaders in those departments, we own those completely as well. So the real difference in why we bumped up to 3 people is for that idea of we took on all of the observation and evaluation of those departments. Our current model, and again, I was part of this when it happened. When we began, we had 3 APs who we all had a caseload of students. In some cases, it was the majority of the grade. Allison Warren, who's the Gates principal, was my co-assistant principal at the time. She kind of specialized in some of our smaller populations, our special populations, and she did things like the master schedule and new student registration planning and all that. Through lots of things that happened in 2020, we decided, no, we can do this better and more efficiently. And so we created a model where there are 2 assistant principals, both the ones named there for 210 days. They do the primary support of students, families, and teachers of a grade level. So Mr. Zhang has all the 7th graders right now, Mrs. Doherty has all the 8th graders, and they really handle everything that goes along with having a class of students. Ms. Broadwater right now is the assistant principal who works all year. She does our master schedule planning, she does our MCAS administration, she does all of the duties and all of the things that go into it, including every year bringing in 6th graders, moving them to 7th and 8th, and then moving them to 9th. So it is a significant undertaking to think about how we schedule our building. Really, it is 8 mini schools happening at the same time and in the same space, who need to all access the lunchroom and phys ed and music and art and all that. So we find value in having somebody's dedicated time on that aspect of it. For many years, I did MCAS, and I would say to people, jokingly and seriously, you can't talk to me during April about a student thing. I have to do this. And so our model right now eliminates that problem. A student, a teacher, a family, caregiver can always get in touch with their student's assistant principal because they're not inundated with this major structural thing happening at the same time. So that's our model, and we feel very confident that it really does support our students, families, and teachers in the best way possible. I have some anecdotes from what any one of us did over the past week, so I'll kind of go through them, and some of them are humorous because we run a junior high school. There was concern from a family, and it was validated that there had potentially been some bullying on a bus in the prior Friday afternoon. That led to an investigation that lasted several days, where the AP talked to at least 8 students, followed up with all of their families, and really worked to understand what the nuance and perspective was in that situation, that we confirmed by video, which is available from our buses, but that just takes time. One day this week, we had a student who was escalated and needed space and time to calm down, and that directly involved me and another assistant principal, as well as several members from our special ed department, as well as outside resources, and that was happening while in my office that I began in this meeting, a meeting to plan the timeline and registration materials for 6th to 7th grade transition. And that was with other people. So I stepped out, and that continued to happen while I was needed elsewhere. Earlier this week, I sent an invitation to all 6th grade families of students on IEPs to come on March 6th to join me and Maureen Lynn for an invitation and a welcome to junior high. This is what special ed looks like here, to get ahead of the many team meetings that will happen now in the 6th grade level. We hosted on Thursday afternoon one of our quarterly meetings for our new teacher group. So we have a large number of people who are in their first year teaching at R.J. Gray, and an even larger number who are in their first 3 years. And so we meet with them just to make sure that they're in good shape, that they understand the rhythm of the year and whatever they need. This particular week, we brought brownies and cookies. They are all very anxious about this budget challenge because it's potentially possible that none of them return next year. And that's really, we needed to meet with them, and they have 5 more months of our school year, and so brownies and cookies helped a little bit. I mentioned the student who was escalated. Later this week, I helped process the student situation with the 2 special educators, myself and our special ed coordinator, to make sure everyone really understood, what did we do okay in this situation? What could we have done differently or better? And how do we continue to support the student involved? We each had our own advisory sessions this week, so we met with my advisory group twice. We each supervised lunch every day. I watched an after-school basketball game against Sudbury. We didn't win, but we played really hard. We all, at different times, covered a class for a teacher who was absent, and we had no substitute. The APs participated in team meetings with teachers and the instructional support team to really think through, all right, what's going on with the student? What could we do to kind of help them? I talked with the social studies department coordinator about logistics for the upcoming spring civics fair, and I am so appreciative some town officials from Boxborough reached out, along with the League of Women Voters, said, how can we help? And so the social studies department coordinator had already had that conversation, so I was able to think through, all right, what can we do now? We met with a student and a family to process some biased language that had been happening, and we made a plan to move forward on that. And then, because it's junior high, a student lost their shoe during the day, and so we tracked down the student who threw the shoe up on a locker, and we found the shoe and returned it to its owner by the use of our video cameras. So the student was reunited with his shoe, which I'm happy about. You know, and really the goal that we have at the junior high, and if you're a junior high parent, you have heard this before, we are really working to build a joyful, inclusive community of engaged learners, and I feel super strongly that our assistant principal team, that includes myself, includes Maureen Lynn as our special ed coordinator, we really do help the teachers. The teachers do the hardest work of the day, no question. I think they benefit from the leadership and the coordination, the flexibility that we can offer them. And to Joni's point earlier, APs are on their feet all the time, responding to phone calls from classrooms, teachers who need something, students who need something, families who need something. So I think that we do a very good job of running a great program, and I'm happy to answer questions later about any part of that role.
Thanks, Jim. And this is just a slide again for middle school models, and again, just offer some comparison points. And then there's some similarities and differences in terms of certainly the evaluation piece. As Jim mentioned, the evaluation piece is pretty substantial with the new, well, it's not new anymore, but at least at the time, the newer education evaluation model and the responsibilities that involved. Some other districts have other administrators who take care of evaluation pieces. At the junior high, it's entirely Jim and his administrative team. Now we're going to shift to elementary. So Tricia's going to talk first about the elementary administrative model, and then I think in a little bit also offer us a little bit of insight on the coaching too.
Thank you, Andrew. My name is Tricia O'Reilly. I am the proud principal of Conant School, and I have the honor and responsibility today to speak not only for Conant, but for my 5 colleagues who are also principals at the elementary level. We have a pretty sort of easy to understand model at the elementary school where we have a principal and an assistant principal in each of our 6 schools. Something that was touched upon earlier today, though, is also that we have special ed coordinators, and they are shared throughout the 6 schools. So in the course of a day, that special ed coordinator would participate in some of the activities that we're talking about. I am pleasantly surprised to sit here and listen to Joni and Jim, because I worried as I listened to them that everybody's going to be bored with what I'm going to say. What we do at the elementary level is the elementary version of what Jim and Joni said, and that was really quite interesting for me to hear as a person who's new to Acton-Boxborough. I would say that in the course of a day and a week and a year at each of the elementary schools, the principal, assistant principal, and special ed coordinator are constantly in communication, constantly deciding who's going where to do what. We have our specialties for sure, and we have our experience in dealing with whether it's families or students or community folks that will lead us to specific decisions about that. But particularly, I'll talk about Conant. We have a principal and an assistant principal. Our special ed coordinator is a 0.5 FTE, which means she is in the building 2.5 days a week. Believe it or not, but our kids in our specialized program and our kids on IEPs who need help do not wait for those 2.5 days when she is in the building. So at any given moment, the assistant principal and I are acting as the special ed coordinator. And I'm very appreciative that my assistant principal has that expertise to do that well. We also have an instructional leadership team. We have individualized support team for students. All the things that Jim and Joni described, our assistant principals manage. MCAS I would say at the elementary level, what sets us apart a little bit from the junior high and the high school is first our busing. It is a daily occurrence at the elementary school that we get a note or a call from transportation and or a parent about something that happened on the bus, whether somebody is suggesting bullying or some sort of misunderstanding or altercation. And when you have a bus full of students who are not supervised, who are used to being supervised, who are used to, for many of them, actually being in a car seat or a booster seat, and now they have free reign on a bus, it's a really difficult thing to self-manage. So I would say every day, just about it would average out to every day, that our assistant principals are starting the day with information that they need to follow up on with a student, with a family. Because of our model here in AB, that often means communicating with another school. It is very common to hear a student say, somebody hit me, and they have a Shrek lunchbox, and I think they go to McCarthy Town. And that's what we have to, that's where we start. And believe it or not, we're very good detectives, and we managed to call McCarthy Town. I'm just using McCarthy Town as an example. That's not it. And we managed to pull the videos. We managed to talk to the assistant principal there. We managed to ask the assistant principals to speak with the children there to get that side of the story. We come back to our students. We come back to the families. This is a regular day in the life of an elementary school, and it's important work. We can laugh about it because it's Saturday morning, afternoon, but it's really important work. If our kids don't show up in the classroom at 8:35, ready to learn, then all the other work we're doing here is not going to get to them. They need to know that they feel safe. They need to know that they feel welcome. So it's actually a bigger part of the day than I think most people know. It certainly surprised me when I came here to Acton-Boxborough and saw that. I think another component that makes the elementary school a little bit different is because we're dealing with younger children who are required to have 100% supervision from the minute they get on the bus till the minute they get off the bus or the minute they get into their car. And so that means when we have a subs shortage, which is just about every day, substitute teacher, when we have a duty that needs to be covered on the playground, when we need a duty that has to be covered in the cafeteria, that's either the principal or the assistant principal who are needing to manage that. And all of this, to underline what Jim and Joni spoke about, all of this is about developing relationships. We know K-12, but I will talk to K-6, that kids will take risks academically when they feel like they have a relationship with the person who's asking them to take the risk. We know that when kids walk into a school building and they feel like somebody there knows who they are willing to do their best, and they are willing to try things that you ask them to do. Our principals and assistant principals are at arrival duty and dismissal duty every day, not just because we want the coverage, but that's how we get to interact with kids. That's when we get to know the dog's name who's in the car. That's where we get to meet the younger sibling. All of this helps us connect with students so that when there is an issue, we're not starting from scratch. We have relationships built. I also can't underscore enough the needs of our students and our families and how dramatically that has changed in the last number of years. This is my third decade in public education, and I remember those old teachers saying, oh, it's not like it used to be. And I have to say, I'm worried that I sound like that right now, but I think most people would be shocked to know that a principal and an assistant principal in an elementary school has to carry a walkie. And we have to carry walkies because at any moment, anything can happen that we have to respond to. I also took a look at my schedule last week. We had to investigate who pulled the fire alarm and then follow up with the family. It was a first grader, and it said pull down, and she was just following directions.
And she could read it. That's great.
We have to respond as a safety care team, probably at least once a day, often more. What that means is there's a dysregulated child somewhere in the building or perhaps fleeing the building, and we have to get a team there immediately to, again, maintain the safety of that student, ultimately to find out how to help that student so that it doesn't happen again. We also have to lead professional learning after school. We also have school council. You know, there's a many mandated things, and those mandated things are on our schedule. But the truth is, when the day starts, we look at that and we hope we can get to some of them. But what pulls our energy and what pulls our time and what makes what we all think what we do so important is that we're responding to the needs of students and sometimes and often their families too. And we do that in the name of knowing that that's how we get our kids to be successful.
So one of the things I think, amazing stories we have from a time perspective, we have to make up some time here because we have to get to some Q&A. So I want to make sure that we go through this in a way that gets the information out, but I'm also sensitive to time. So as we go through the next couple of slides, just let's make sure we can try and be efficient.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit first on this slide and then hand it over to Tricia. So Tricia, first, I'm really happy to hear that our literacy instruction, our reading instruction is working. That's fabulous. When we envisioned an elementary MTSS structure for a district our size, 6 elementary schools, 7 grade levels, we presented to the school committee a structure that included district-wide and discipline-specific coordinators, coaches that were split among our schools, specialists at each of our schools, and reading assistants, really to support that early literacy instruction. And I think it's just important to take a note that MTSS involves also behavioral and SEL components. What we're talking about right now is the structural side for the academic piece of MTSS. Clearly there's overlap with skills and strategies though. So due to the last 2 years' budget constraints, the discipline-specific specific coordinator positions and the digital literacy coach positions have either been eliminated or are proposed to be eliminated in order to preserve the building-based coaches. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit about those 2 positions and then turn it back over to Dr. Riley. So we have 1 digital literacy coach right now for all 6 elementary schools. The main role of this position is to identify and support educators' use of digital tools in alignment with the district's MTSS and Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, goals. And so what do we mean by that? Well, digital tools expand the ways or the modalities in the ways that students access and engage in their learning. So when we're talking about Tier 1 for MTSS in the classroom, what are the different ways that the digital tools enhance students' engagement and access to learning? It might be through a visual format. It might be through an audio format. Increasingly in science, it's through simulations, digital simulations. And so all of these are important tools that are brought into the classroom for Tier 1. And she's also identifying tools for intervention and practice for Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. The use of digital tools also expands the way that students can demonstrate, which is the 3rd principle for Universal Design for Learning, or express their learning. And yes, we still think it's really important for students to write and draw pictures and create things with their hands, as our Director of Technology says, the analog way. But it's also important for them to develop the skills to express their learning through digital formats, through movies and through presentations, through songs and through digital posters. The digital coach also works very closely with the special ed department to identify and support the use of assistive technology for students who need that support through their IEP. And finally, in a very proactive way, the digital literacy coach creates lessons on how to use technology safely and how to be a good digital citizen. And we talk about some of the roles that the APs have. One technology incident can take up, a couple of days' worth of investigations and work. And so we need to be proactive in that way as well. The disciplinary or the discipline-specific coordinator roles we have and have had are the lead pre-K 6 learners in their discipline, and they coordinate the district-wide work in that discipline. And so you can see in the notes, the 3rd bullet, really the varied and many responsibilities that are listed. But I want to just very quickly bring to life one aspect of what that looks like. Before the pandemic, we had 2 literacy coordinators who were very deeply involved in learning the science of reading. They were learning about dyslexia. They were learning about structured literacy. And they worked very closely with doctors at MGH and at Harvard University, doctors like Nadine Gabb and Dr. Christodoulou, and also leaders in the field like Melissa Orkin and Sarah Gannon, to develop relationships so they were able to bring those folks to the district and to really provide professional learning and a foundation and to create district-wide literacy teams, which really positioned AB well so that when we were ready to purchase a core literacy program and we were able to time it with when the state was offering grants, competitive grants, our coordinators wrote those grants and were able to receive $200,000 for us to implement the core literacy program. Talking with my colleagues in other districts, as Peter alluded to earlier, districts now who are going out looking for new literacy programs, that money is now gone. The high quality instructional materials grants money is no longer available. So having coordinators doing that work really positioned us very well. And as we're implementing, they're also able to reach out to their colleagues in other districts so we can really expand that collective circle of learning of how to implement these various programs. And the same is true for mathematics. Our coordinator did very similar work and recently has brought in over $300,000 worth of core mathematics programs and professional learning. And so I just want to point out that, and give you a snapshot, that the loss of these two types of positions is going to be significant at AB. I'll turn back to Trish so she can talk about the coaches.
You're off.
I'm going to talk just for a minute about coaching and instructional coaching. I had the pleasure of actually supervising coaches in my previous district, so I have an understanding of not only what they do, but how important they are in at least two different places. Our work has shifted over the number of years, our work as educators, and we are expected to be, as well I think we should be, data-driven. We need to know what is efficient, what works, what doesn't work. More importantly, we need to know which children, which students are we reaching, and which students are we perhaps not. We also know the earlier we find that out in a child's journey in school, the better chance we have of filling in a gap or determining what different method would best work for them. We can only do that by gathering data in a standardized way, in a universal way, and in a way that happens often throughout the school year. Our coaches are absolutely essential to this culture that we are building and will continue to build in our building, where data will guide not only which students are getting the intervention, but which interventions, which resources are appropriate, what's the next step for students. I would say the second thing about coaches that I think folks just need, aside from the fact that elementary teachers are expected to be expert in all disciplines. They are expected to instruct in such a way that the results from very early on, starting in 3rd grade, are measured on MCAS. So there's no hiding. If you are an elementary teacher and you're not sure about something, that will show up very early in a child's career if they haven't had the specific instruction that they need. But I think one of the things that's really important to note is that elementary teachers and elementary teaching, and I'm guessing this is true at junior high and high school, it's an incredibly isolating position. Some people think that's a little counterintuitive because we're in a building with hundreds or thousands of people in the course of a day, but in terms of the other adults that they connect with, there really aren't many. And one of the real gifts of instructional coaches is that they visit different classrooms. So not only are they individual professional learning for a 2nd grade teacher who perhaps really is confident in their literacy instruction, but isn't quite sure about something in the new math program, that instructional coach can help that teacher, but that instructional coach also has the gift of having been in many classrooms, having seen many practices, perhaps having seen just recently a student who has a similar profile, and can say to that teacher, you know what we just tried across town or across the hall, let's try it here. That is not only a great gift for the teacher, it has a direct impact on the student perhaps that day, certainly on the teacher's practice for long-term in the classroom. So if you think about the coaches as the glue that's holding all of this academic requirement together, as well as the constant professional learning that is required of all teachers, particularly elementary teachers in all 4 disciplines, 4+ disciplines, they are essential parts to how we run our buildings, the way we know we want to run them, and the way we know is best for kids.
Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit more on instructional leadership, continue to the junior high and high school. And these are probably roles that you're a little bit more familiar with, department heads. I think we've all been socialized to that over the number of years. So I'm going to give you each 1 minute on each of these slides to try and summarize kind of the typical roles and what these do in the district.
I'm setting my own timer. 1 minute, 1 minute, 30 seconds. I'll get there. We have 5 department coordinators: math, science, English, world language, social studies. The admin team is paired with departments. I'm a former Spanish teacher. I work with the world language department. I also work with the social studies department. English, math, and science are as well connected. So department coordinators are full-time teachers who receive a stipend in addition to their daily work. Those stipends for the junior high is $29,000 total for the 5 people who occupy those positions. They plan the department meetings, they run the department meetings, they keep in touch with the department members. This year, our math department coordinator has done an amazing job of setting up what they're called math ladders. They are really looking at the skills that kids need to learn in a really redesigned assessment in a way that is pretty amazing. I got it. And we're very proud of the work that the teacher leader did in that domain. Separately, we're working with our English, science, and social studies department coordinators to really talk about reading and writing in those classes, and that's a combined work of the department coordinators and the admin team, and we're doing a great job, and I'm all done.
Jim is throwing the gauntlet down.
Yeah, this is typical.
Let's see how you do.
We'll see how
She
we
can't
can
do
do.
it.
Yeah, this is typical. All right, I'm going to talk about high school department leaders. As a department leader for 20 years, this position is very near and dear to my heart. Department leaders do many things, and you can read those bulleted on the list. To running their department meetings, working closely with the high school admin team. They are the point person that connects the 15 to 20 people in their department to the overall school in terms of curriculum planning, class assignment, course and elective creation. They also deal with student issues within particular classes in their content area. In the last 2 years, we have asked department leaders to be involved in more school-wide initiatives, and they have taken an incredible leadership role, especially in our course leveling work, to provide more advanced level opportunities and diverse settings for students to have classes in. And they've been really instrumental in that. I think you know that we provide a very high-performing, high-level education for students, and the department leaders really help coordinate that and manage that for our school. In addition, they've been instrumental in the course leveling work and social and emotional work that we've done recently to help support all of our students. So I really can't say enough about the department leaders. How'd I do? You didn't
Not-
get you didn't,
not as good as
where
Jim.
was the if there was a buzzer, I would have stopped.
Oh, hey, it's me now. Questions and discussions. All right, so we are going to take about 10 minutes. Let's hope max to do some questions and discussion, and then we will break for lunch. And hi, Diane, I see you there. Just want to remind everybody we're going to go through the committees first, so the school committee, then the boards, and then we'll go out to the public from there. So looking first, questions or comments from the school committee. Andrew, Lakshmi, and then Leela. Go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks for this. I've got two questions, sorry. On the leadership side, Peter, a lot of us in the room come from corporations and organizations where the structure that you put up will feel really familiar, but I think that part leads towards lending our experience to this organization. Can you speak a little bit about the difference between a service mandate of an organization like a district versus the kind of profit mandate that comes when you're working within a corporation?
Maybe. I'm not sure. I think in a corporate model, you're so much driven by profit and loss that, and obviously this is not my experience, which is why it's a little hard for me to speak to, but when your revenues go down, so do you make choices around the services. You just simply reduce aspects of your organization and the services that exist. In an educational model, the students you serve operate independently of whether or not there's money available, right? Like the student in a classroom that, evacuates the school, right, on their own, and is running down the road, doesn't care whether or not you got, funding a level services budget, a level funded budget, or a 0% budget. Like, they don't care. They're the student, and they bring their needs to the table. So I think that's the fundamental challenge that maybe schools have that corporations don't. We're not building things. We're dealing with, students, and we're dealing with families, and we're dealing with people primarily.
Thank you, and this is for Joni. You were talking about the assistant principals, and assistant principals, as Andrew said, are different probably than any of us experienced when we were in school, although I do like the idea of using the Hogwarts nomenclature to start naming them. Very cool. I'm surprised by the scope of their responsibilities. I can only imagine how they balance their days. In anthropology, there's this thing called Dunbar's number, and it's a cognitive limit of number of people that any person can have a relationship with. That number's around 140. We're a bit higher than that. And so if recognizing that 412 is much greater, how are the APs handling the demands in their time, and what's the ability to increase their capacity, if any, as you go through their days?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. 2 years ago, we changed that from about a 1 to 800 ratio to about a 1 to 400 ratio, where we took the deans out from the linear structure underneath the associate principals and moved them out so that each now have a caseload of 400. That doesn't really answer your question. Last year, we then created counselor and AP teams so that counselors, 2 to 3 counselors are working with the same students as that one AP. I think we can still look for further structural adaptations or shifts over time, but those are 2 things that we've done recently to try to create a smaller school or to try to help APs coordinate and know the students that they're working with more. If you talk to an AP, they'll tell you that they feel like they know their students much better, especially with their biweekly AP team meetings when they get to talk to the counselors about the students each week. But I can't say that it's perfect.
Lakshmi.
I'm going to be probably direct on this because I don't know how else to say it. I'm finding the number of coordinators, especially the earlier slides, the coordinators, to be quite high. And what is concerning me is that they're not directly kind of in contact with the students. So would that be better spent, that training directly to the teacher? I know you're going to say we are training through them, but if we did train the teachers or the adults who are working with the students, why do we need these coordinators, especially so many of them? And there seems to be kind of an overlap, and it's like me, I'm a laundry mom, I'm a cooking mom, I'm a driving mom. It's like I'm splitting mine, and when none of those roles fit, where does the responsibility lie? How do you define those gray areas of responsibility?
Can you just clarify which coordinators are you
I
thinking
think
of?
the elementary ones, there was a mental health, and if you can go back to the psychology and the elementary, what's the difference between those 2?
Actually, maybe I see Heather and Susan Root here. Can you just speak a little bit what you do? So we have our elementary psychology coordinator, who's also our district-wide SEL mental and behavioral health coordinator, and our high school and junior high psychology coordinator. So maybe they can talk about what they do in the coordinator role versus what other aspects of the job they have.
So, is it on? Oh. So specific to the job responsibilities that fall within the psychology department head role, which is what is referenced on this slide, Susan and I both at our respective levels, so she does 7-12, I do K-6, provide the professional development, oversee the psychologists at all of those levels, and we work with training the staff and providing support services in terms of the evaluation process, also gen ed students and interventions that we may do for mental and behavioral health. Yeah, we do all the supervision and evaluation for the psychologists across the district in collaboration with the building administration teams. Yep. A lot of our time is spent in student safety and crisis response. We also are both involved at the district level and the district safety response team and provide the mental health lens for responses through that. I don't know, there's a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I think we also coordinate very closely with our counterparts in special education leadership. School psychologists generally in the district support students in special education, and therefore the connection between the school psychology department and the special education department, we are part of special ed, but there's a lot of communication that happens, a lot of support that we are providing to our psychologists about how to interact effectively both with special education leadership and with special education service providers. We also serve on a district-wide special education leadership team. And I would also just make the point that all of these coordinators, given all those responsibilities, they all have direct service caseloads as well. So each one of us in these leadership roles, with the exception of Heather, who has that other big role as her other half, but a good percentage of our time is spent actually doing direct service supports to students and programs.
Can you maybe also talk a little bit about what's the difference between a counselor and a psychologist in a school? Because I'm not sure, and particularly, elementary and high school counselors have somewhat different roles, but then psychologists have very, very different roles than our counselors.
Yeah, do you want to start with elementary? Start with the little kids.
Sure. So there is a lot of overlap between the roles of psychology and counseling. Primarily at the elementary level, the school counselors work with the entire general education population. Both it might be in whole class lessons, it might be with individual students, it might be small groups, it might be building-wide initiatives. A lot of times the psychologists also do those components, but they focus more heavily on the students that are receiving mental health supports and services through our IEPs, so our students in specialized programs, and who require specialized instruction for mental and behavioral health supports. The psychologists are also responsible for the evaluations, so the psychological evaluations that we do for all of our IEPs and our cognitive evaluations for all of our IEPs. That's another distinction at the elementary level. Actually, that's K-12. Both of those roles, K-12, are involved in crisis response. They both do community liaison with outside service providers. They both do building-wide supports and services in terms of whether it's staff development or communication and education of families. What else?
Yeah, I would say the only difference I would say to the description that Heather gave of at the secondary level, the counselors are doing much more around post-high school planning, career preparation for students, really working on the transition. Junior high as well is really adding that additional component around course selection and really helping students to make an academic program for themselves that meets their needs and their goals and their areas of passion. But then I would say similarly, we're responding in the same way. But I hope that's helpful. We also at the high school have 2 adjustment counselors in addition to school counselors. Again, similarly at the junior high and high school, all students work with a school counselor, and then those students with higher level needs may work with a school adjustment counselor, and then for our students with the highest, most intense level of needs, they work with school psychologists. So that's just a different way of thinking about how we divide the responsibilities, all supporting students and their social, emotional, and mental health needs.
Yeah. So Lakshmi, just to sum that up, I think in terms of why we have the number of different coordinators that we do in that area. Excuse me. So from a counseling perspective, the secondary coordinator, in addition to having the overall general, counseling lens, has to have very specific knowledge and expertise in the area of like career development, college planning processes, things like that, because that's a heavy focus of what that secondary counseling role is. Whereas at the elementary level, it's also a real focus on the broad understanding of social emotional learning and how to go into classrooms, help counselors help counselors plan lessons, create curriculum for, planning purposes in that regard. So it's slightly different skill sets and levels of types of expertise, not levels. And then same thing from a psychology standpoint. I think, there's such a heavy load in terms of testing and assessment, in addition to just the psychological services, and then really making sure that we have sufficient support for, kind of crisis management and when students are in crisis, and the ability to support our counselors and psychologists who might be working directly with students and have good, sound processes to make sure that's managed is probably one of the reasons why we've allocated the staff in that area.
So based on.
I'm sorry, I need to keep us moving. We're almost a half hour late now. Maybe if we've got time later, we'll come back. I know that Leela had a question. We have to get to everybody else. Leela?
Yeah, I wanted to first say thank you for explaining some of that. I know that it's significant. And I've heard misunderstandings in the community around like thinking that APs kind of serve as like one-on-one babysitters, like when students are dysregulated. And I know that you all have spoken to kind of responding to students who are dysregulated or kind of have supportive needs. And I know that the laws have also shifted in 2022 and 37H3.25. And so I'm wondering if you could just, emotional labor aside, speak to the time cost of needing to do all of the extra stuff on top of just responding to student needs.
Jim, you want to talk to that one?
I can start. Yeah, I mean, Peter referenced, we had a student situation this week that took myself and an AP several hours of involvement. And as to Trisha's point, I started the day with a calendar that didn't get done. And that was okay, because that need was the biggest in that moment. Peter and Adam actually both saw me about 2 weeks ago out on Charter Road, just looking down to the high school, because I was monitoring a situation where the AP was down there with a student who had left our building. So those are the types of things that take your day. What does that mean later in the day? Well, it means you didn't do the observation you had planned. It meant you didn't get to the mid-cycle, which is due on February 15th for non-professional staff teachers. It means you didn't necessarily plan well for something that was coming up after lunch. You're asking a good point. It's hard to quantify, because that is the job. I cringed when you said babysitter, because that is the farthest thing from what we're doing. And that's pretty demeaning if that is the impression that's out there. We are trying to get students back to a place of being regulated so that they can go through their day, and as Tricia noted, be open to learning. If they come in and they can't, because the thing is running around in their head, they're not doing their math. They're not doing well on their science tests. So our job is to help eliminate those things off their plate so they can go in the class and learn. So,
Be a closing comment for all of that. It'll be quick. One of the reasons when you look at this and you look at our average spending across these three categories, clearly instructional leadership, which includes our school leaders, principals and assistant principals, has been, of the three categories, our highest priority of those three areas. That is not by mistake. Principals right now have some of the hardest jobs in the world. They are dealing with crises, they're dealing with instructional planning, they're tending to the education of kids, they're trying to reach families that have, they've been unsuccessful with in the past that they're trying to bring in. They're managing complex staffs that have their own needs and requirements. It is an incredibly hard job to be a principal, and providing the support that they need within their buildings has been a priority. And that means that we've made decisions to reduce at the district level to make sure that the resources exist in the building for principals to be able to do their jobs. It means that we've trimmed in other areas of the budget to make sure that they have their needs to do the job. If the building leadership isn't there in a sound structure, all of teaching and learning within a building is impacted. And I know it's easy to think otherwise, but it is absolutely not the case. The building leadership creates the environment that allows teachers to focus on the work they need to do with kids. And if you don't have one, you're not going to have the other, because now teachers are going to be responding to all those other things that the leadership isn't available to do. And I want to drive that point home, because it's a really important one, and it's driven every decision that we've made around why we make sure that we allocate those resources in our schools.
Thank you. Back table over there from Acton, any comments or questions? Center table, Boxborough. Yes, go ahead.
I
really wanted to thank Andrew for going beyond the one-dimensional budget numbers to create a three-dimensional view of what's going on. I'd also like to share that this is not unique to Acton or Boxborough. I do work at the higher ed level, and we've seen on college campuses across the country that mental health is a bigger issue than it ever was before. 8 out of 10 college or university presidents say that they have to spend more effort in mental health for their students. So you're not alone in wrestling with a bigger issue than it ever was before.
Thank you. Hi, Diane. David, sorry, go ahead.
I just quickly would like to clarify my understanding of a couple of roles. Is it correct that the academic area coaches are do professional development plus for elementary school teachers, and the academic area specialists work directly with students for proficiency and achievement in that academic area?
Sure. Yep, primarily. So the coaches, when we talk about professional learning, instructional coaching is one of the best kinds of professional learning that there is. And they also lead professional learning amongst grade level teams and within their schools. So they are providing that aspect. And then the specialists are providing direct services to the students for that intervention.
And as such, the coaches are classified as administration, and the specialists are classified under general education for budgetary purposes.
Coaches are classified under professional development from a budget standpoint. And, you know, department leaders as well as, you know, coordinators who evaluate people and school leaders are all, in curriculum coordinators, are characterized as instructional leadership.
All right, anybody else from that?
Adam, can I ask just a quick one?
Yeah, John.
Peter, would it be possible to create this chart for all of the $18,000 that are you, is it done already?
We actually have that, yeah. We just didn't do it for this meeting, but I have it in a subsequent slide if we come back to it later.
Yeah, because I think it would be very informative.
Yeah.
Was that the one we presented at our last meeting?
You mentioned
Yeah, it's in the clips.
$18,000, which is very powerful, but showing how within each subcategory that you're, you know, with further detail, it's showing that
Yeah.
you're.
So that exists, and I'll say this for everybody in the room. It was in our presentation from our last school committee meeting, which is on the website. You can download just the presentations, and that information comes there. In fact, I think I shared that with Bob on the Boxborough FinCom last time, because that comparable was definitely an interesting piece. All right, Diane, thank you for waiting. Turn that mic on. Sorry. Nope.
Okay.
Perfect.
I have a very quick question and then just a brief comment, and I'll try to be quick about it because I know everyone wants to go to lunch. So the coaches are not also providing direct service?
There are probably occasions where they might be working with a couple of students, but mostly in the service of modeling for the teachers.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, everyone, for all the hard work you're doing in this really difficult budget season. I just wanted to talk a little bit, put a little bit of a different lens on this because I'm also a parent. I was a school committee member when we were first building out a continuum of services for Pathways and Compass, and MTSS wasn't even on anybody's mind at that point. The system within AB schools right now with MTSS and the build out of all the continuum of support services for special education, they support the most vulnerable AB students through the entirety of their K-12 experience. This is new. It started like when Peter jumped on board, a little bit before that with Pathways. And my kids went through the system before that, and there were cracks. There were cracks in the system when my kids went through AB. My son, who attended AB from 2004 to 2018, fell through those cracks. And there was a slide presentation at the budget session on January in 2020 with a slide from District Management Group, which had come to do just a kind of an overview of our special education services and stuff. And they noted that 62% of out-of-district placements at the time were students with autism, that 35%, and emotional and behavioral disabilities was 27%, and 36% of those with emotional disabilities went out-of-district in grade 8 at great cost to the district, and my son was one of those kids way before that. There was no Compass program at McCarthy Town when he was in elementary school. There was no multi-tiered system of supports for social-emotional learning at the time. My daughter also fell through the cracks. There were no mandated dyslexia screeners then, no awareness of best practices, no multi-tiered system of supports to help teachers know where and how to support her. There was only hyper-local control at the building and classroom levels, and I am all for local control, but there has to be system-wide guardrails to safeguard best practices or monitor progress in skill building for our students. And I don't think that, I mean, you've done a great job of explaining like what the jobs are, but like from like the school committee high level, you have, none of that can happen without really, really strong instructional leadership. And I love this slide that we are below the state average, I think it was this slide, on instructional leadership, because there's a lot of misconception out there in the public. The minute you say admin, it's like everyone brains turn up and they think of just like, I don't know, they're filling out paperwork. I don't know what the public perception of they think that admin are doing, but without strong instructional leadership, you cannot do these things. So I just want to, thank you again for all you're doing, and just really, I wanted to just put kind of like a lens on this instructional leadership section from like a parent's perspective, because you did a great job explaining it, but it impacts, like impacted my family, and it's impacting families now on the positive side. So this is not, I mean, to me, this is not like like nice to have, it's a have to have in any budget. So thank you for giving me time.
Thank you, Diane. All right, it is 12:30. We're going to take 15 minutes to get some food and get seated, and we're going to rearrange the entire crew up here and have an educators panel. So in about 15 minutes, we'll start our educators panel at 12:45. Thank you.